Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, Scott Daly, a reader constantly, and joining me as always is another one of the missing. His refrigerator might be running, but don't try to catch it. It's absolutely stuffed with flying leeches. It's Matt Freeman. How's it going today, Matt?
Hey, everybody. You want to come step inside this refrigerator for a moment?
No.
Good idea.
This week, our 19-part coverage of Stephen King's It continues with part 11, covering chapters 16 and 17 of the novel. Eddie has another run-in with Henry Bowers, which ends up putting him in the hospital and in direct confrontation with his mother. Meanwhile, Bev has her own Bowers story, and we'll get there. We'll get there. Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
So I love the confrontation with his mother chapter. I love all of that stuff. That's some of the best stuff in the book for me. This is another one of those weeks where that's just jumped out to me as a clear highlight.
Yeah.
And I also should be no secret at this point, I really love villains. I really love dark, evil characters with screwed up psyches. And so crawling into Patrick Haas. I'm gonna have to say this name a bunch of times, so I better get it right. What is it?
Hochstetter.
Okay. Hochstetter. Crawling into his head for a while. His cozy little noggin was very fun in that gross way. That a certain kind of villain is fun. So I love those two aspects jumped out to me as like the most enjoyable. I mean, everything. There's a lot of really great stuff here. There's also, of course, his interaction with the pharmacist, which is another really interesting thing. I don't know if I've quite actually sort of nailed down what it is that I love about that. So I'm really looking forward to talking to you about that part specifically.
Oh, great. Yeah, fantastic. I do think this is a really interesting tale of two chapters here this week, where I agree with you. I love Eddie's confrontation with his mother. That is very much a chapter where you kind of feel good about your character, like he's standing up to her, he's getting back at her, like he's taking control of himself in a lot of ways, and that's in many ways a feel good chapter. And then we move on to the next chapter 17, and that is almost the opposite in a lot of ways, where it's a very disturbing chapter. It's very uncomfortable. There's a lot of like it is the type of chapter, and we'll talk about this when we get there, where when Pennywise shows up, you're actually just like, oh, thank God.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that, because I was worried that I would be the only one who was like, wow, I can't wait till Pennywise kills this little shit.
Yeah. And so, it's really interesting difference between these two chapters. I love them both. I think if I had to like pick my favorite of the two, I would definitely say that Eddie's chapter to me is just like parts of what I love about this book so much, and it's I don't want to minimize Bev. I love her as a character, and I really enjoy her chapter as well, but that chapter is not designed to be enjoyable in many ways.
Yes, I agree.
All right, let's get into it. But of course, before we do that, we do have a few quick announcements this week. The big one, the first one that's a new announcement for us this week, we got to guest star on another Stephen King podcast this week. Matt, we did it.
It was extremely fun. We were each invited to show up on the Year of Underrated Stephen King podcast by Kim over there. That is a very fun podcast. That Kim covers some of the same books that we've covered, but a lot of the books that we haven't covered. So if there are certain King books that you are like, dang, I want to hear somebody talk about that book, and Scott and Matt just refuse to do it, then you can go check out the Year of Underrated Stephen King feed and see if it's something that Kim has talked about.
I agree. You should definitely go listen to our interviews, because it's us and you love us and we're
of course
and wonderful. But as soon as you finish those two interviews, like wholeheartedly recommend checking out everything else Kim has done. This is the type of thing, and Kim knows this, so I'm not afraid to say it, but like when she reached out to us, I had not listened to her show yet. But one of like the first things I do when someone reaches out to me or you or us or anything and says, "Hey, you want to come guest on our show?" I go listen to that show right away, right? Because it's like you're not going to agree to do something without checking out what the vibe of the show is first.
Right.
And I was kind of like immediately blown away by Kim's show. Like I think the first episode I listened to was just the one that I think she had happened to publish right around the time she reached out to us, which was her episode on The Eyes of the Dragon, which is a book you and I covered and love quite a bit. But I was just kind of immediately sucked into the way she talks about the novels. The production of the podcast is so solid. Like everything about the show is really wonderful. And you guys are a bunch of nerds that really love nerding out about Stephen King. She is our people. If you're not listening to the show already, like go do it. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree.
But definitely listen to our episodes first because we rock.
And then you got to post somewhere which one of the two of our episodes you listened to first.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say which you liked better. And I was like, oh no, it's Matt's.
Well, the one that you listened to first is kind of telling us which one you liked better.
I like that. Yeah. I think they're both really good interviews. Of course it was a pleasure talking with her. I did realize during the course of my interview, as I listened back to it, that I say the word fascinating way too many times. So I got to work on that.
Now that you've pointed it out, I'm sure you'll say it way less and not more, because it's a thing now. Yeah,
that's definitely what's going to happen for sure.
Right.
All right. So yeah, that is once again the Year of Underrated Stephen King podcast. Please go check that out wherever any podcast can be found. Kim is wonderful, and we will definitely be talking to her again for sure.
That's right.
All right, what else we got this week, Matt?
Well, once again, we're reminding you to go check out the survey for our Kingslingers trip to Bangor in June 14th, 15th of 2024. Head on over to doofmedia.com/Bangor survey and fill that out, whether you want to go or not, just to help us gauge the size that event should be. We're going to just plug this until we don't need to plug it anymore, and because that helps us gain data and it increases the fun that we're going to have.
Absolutely. We've only got, I think, 10 more days until we shut that survey down, and pick our winners for our Holly book kind of drawing that we're doing along with that survey. So yeah, if you haven't filled it out yet, this is your weekly reminder to do so, and get a chance at getting that book, which I'm holding Holly in my hands right now, Matt. It's because it's out now. It's the 5th of September. It's out. I've read 6 pages because my evening was a little more hectic than I thought it was going to be, and I thought I was going to get some time to get right into this thing, but I haven't yet. But I'm very excited about this book, and you should be too. You can win a copy.
Yeah. I know nothing about Holly.
Yeah, I mean, that's like true times a million.
Yeah, nothing at all.
One more quick announcement. This is a reminder for our patrons specifically, but voting for the Do the King Thing 2 contest is still ongoing over at our Patreon. That's patreon.com/doofmedia. There are the 10 stories that Matt and I selected from the over 50 stories we got submitted to us. And we'd like you to read those 10 stories and vote on your favorite. So that contest is going to be open for a few more weeks. So please check that out. Read those stories and get voting. That's once again, patreon.com/doofmedia. Patrons at any level have access to vote and read the stories. So please, patrons, do that. And if you're not a patron yet, that's a perfect time to get in there.
That's right.
Okay, we're ready to start the episode. Finally, we're here. We've done it.
Yes.
Let's begin with chapter 16, Eddie's Bad Break. Just as Richie finishes up his story of the smoke hole, a pain races up Eddie's arm. Like Richie's 27-year-old eye smoke, Eddie is somehow magically experiencing a 27-year-old broken bone. I do, Matt, love here at the beginning of this chapter, Eddie's kind of realization that it's actually weird as hell that he, of all people, never questioned where this clear previous broken bone came from. It says here, like, Eddie thinks now that the lack of interest was in itself very odd. He is, after all, a man who attaches importance to a sneeze or a slight change in color of his stools. But for some reason he was just like, whatever, it just hurts sometimes when it rains. I'll just take some Advil. Very un-Eddie like.
Yeah. Guess I shattered my arm at some point. Huh. Yeah, I do. I mean, it's totally explained in text, how this is working. It's just, I agree. Yeah. It's kind of funny. It's just kind of funny to sort of mention this as a specific thing that it's just particularly weird that Eddie never would have thought about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So Eddie prepares to tell the story of Henry Bowers and his arm break, and we briefly see that Bev knows a little bit something about this, actually knows the exact date that it happened and the exact date that Patrick Hockstetter died, one of Bowers' gang members. And the reason for that is because she saw it take Hockstetter. Nor does she tell them that she believed then and believes now that Patrick Hockstetter was crazy, perhaps even crazier than Henry Bowers. She will tell them, but this is Eddie's turn. She will speak next, and then she supposes that Ben will narrate the climax of that July's events, the silver bullet that never quite dared to make a nightmare agenda if there ever was one, she thinks. But that crazy exhilaration persists. When did she last feel this young? She can hardly sit still.
I love that particular beat from Bev's perspective, mirroring, I guess it was Richie's last week, observing that he felt young in a way that he'd forgotten it was possible to feel.
Yeah. I mean, I think you could maybe presume that everyone was feeling the same way Richie did, but King kind of, just connects that quickly here by having another person feel that same way, and then we can, with 2 beats on a plot, we can start to say, okay, so everyone just feels this way. This is happening to them all.
I also have this weird, so just referencing this paragraph you just read, where she says, I suppose Bill will speak next to Ben will speak next to narrate the climax. And I'm actually kind of like, I feel like something's going to happen to interrupt that, which is funny because King always calls the shot and then he takes the shot, right? But it's just like for some reason, this feels like a time when like breaking the pattern would fit,
Interesting. Yeah. No, I like that. We'll find out for sure.
We will see.
This is something I did want to talk to you about, though, Matt, because I think it's something we've noticed but haven't maybe said explicitly yet, that while, the July of 1958 section of the book that we've been in for a while here has a similar structural conceit as June of 1958, i.e., we go loser by loser with these chapters. They start out with this italicized bit in 1985 and then eventually move into the past and then back to non-italicized text. Like that has structurally, this section of the book has been the same as June. But there is a little wrinkle in July that I think is worth talking about because, in June, the characters were kind of quietly and individually remembering the events of that summer while sitting isolated on planes, buses, cars, etc. They were heading back. In July, these characters are still remembering these moments, but I think importantly, they're telling these moments as stories to the rest of the losers, helping them remember as well. It's this great thing because that's what you do at reunions. Right, Matt?
Yeah, that's right, Scott. When you have reunions, you got to reminisce about the past over some beers, ideally.
Yeah. It's definitely like, remember that time we did that. Remember that thing you did that. Like you relive all these moments from your time together by telling each other stories about them. Usually one person kind of drives a story or a part of a story, and then the others pick up, someone else picks up where they left off. It's like, oh, no, Joe, you're better at telling this part. Tell it. And so this is something that I think King is once again, taking this idea of reunion, this idea of friends coming together after a long time and reminiscing and making it this structural conceit of the story. And I think it simultaneously is once again a story about storytelling, in that the way these people are telling the story to each other is showing how the power of story can like awaken collective memories of people. Like this is some powerful thing that you might not have remembered something individually, Matt, but if I start telling you the story of this time that you and I did something, suddenly your brain goes, oh yeah, I remember where I filed that, and suddenly I can pull that up and I remember it myself.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the magic of what's happening here.
Yeah.
Is the fact that they are sort of almost group hallucinating. They're group walking themselves back into the past together, and that I think is is part of the spell that they're casting.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's funny, I don't know how literal to take what I just said there. I feel like there is a sense in which everything they're doing is part of an elaborate ritual where they are in fact performing magic. The individual walkabouts they had to do were
Mhm.
part of the ritual. Now this coming together to recite the story piece by piece, turn by turn, is part of the ritual. And as it goes on, they begin to feel younger. They begin to feel all these sensations. This is all sort of long, group incantation that they're doing together. And I enjoy that element of it. Right, there's
Mhm.
there's elements of the text that elevate these scenes beyond just like. And then they all sat down and had a few brewskis, brewski beers, and talked. Right, it's more than
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Totally agree. It's really wonderful. I like this quote as well. It says, "They all died, didn't they?" Beverly asks quietly. After Jimmy Cullum, the only ones who died were Henry Bauer's friends, or his ex-friends. That's interesting, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's super interesting. Number one, it tells us how close to the end we really are because
Hmm.
there's no more. There's a lot of okay. There's several interesting things. The second interesting bit that jumped out is he says she says ex friends, implying to me at least that at the time of their death, they were no longer as fond of Henry as they had been. The
Yeah.
thought occurred to me that maybe even Pennywise is like saving Henry from them in some sense, or protecting Henry from them, because perhaps it sees value in Henry. It wants to keep Henry around specifically, and it could care less about these other friends of his, or maybe actively wants to kill them for some reason. Anyway, yeah, it's very interesting, and I guess we'll talk about this more later. But I thought it was interesting that it goes after, it intentionally goes after Henry's, friend and acquaintance,
Patrick
Patrick
Hockstetter. Yeah.
Huckstetter here, and it's like, and I was gonna save this for later, I guess, but that doesn't matter. It's like, why go after like the bad kid? Like
Right.
you think of the evil force as being some, and I know this is kind of reductive sounding, but like you'd think that Pennywise would want the bad kids to survive, especially someone as bad as Patrick. Like, he's a future serial killer, um, dyed in the wool, and yet Pennywise takes him out, and it's like, wow, there's got to be a real compelling reason for why. Either that, or it's all just random and it's just kind of luck. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm still trying to figure it out.
No, I mean that's kind of why I pulled this out, is this really fascinating idea that after a certain point, the only deaths are the bad guys,
Hmm.
the friends or ex friends of the great antagonist of their youth that isn't a magical clown. Um,
Hmm.
that is a really interesting choice, because I agree. You think, like evil using evil, and evil, aligning with evil, you would see that he would not want to target these kids, but no, it consistently does. That's very interesting. And yeah, I mean, to go back to your previous point about, the state of the friendship between these kids and Henry Bowers, I think there is kind of a quick, not fully grasped memory of Bill's, that he says that's like, oh yeah, wasn't there a time where Victor Chris came to me, like, really worried and scared and almost like asking for help about Henry? And then he just kind of moves past that, and like, it's like, I that's not, that hasn't happened chronologically yet, so they haven't been able to fully recall that yet, but it just plants the seeds for us here, right? that
Absolutely. Yeah.
that as things are escalating, as things are getting worse, as these characters are getting worse, um things are getting bad, and then the people around him are dying for sure.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess we'll see.
So Eddie begins to tell the story, but before we get to the arm break, he has to tell another story. He has to tell about what happened to him earlier that day with Mr. Keene, the druggist. And because it is a fucking asshole, as he gears up to tell the story, Eddie's aspirator begins moving by itself, rolling off the table as the balloons left by Pennywise that say asthma medicine gives you cancer suddenly explode. Um, man, what a guy.
It's not even funny, Pennywise. Like there's no joke there.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's also interesting because it, you know, it's interesting to think about why Pennywise injects when it does. And here it's almost like it really doesn't want Eddie to remember this story.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is a very powerful story. This is an important story. You know, he
Yeah.
wants to distract from this story.
Yeah. I also like it, man, they're so complicated because I totally agree with you. There is also something really fascinating about the idea that like this happens because Eddie is like, as he's kind of gearing up emotionally and mentally to tell the story, he feels his chest start to tighten up and like goes for his aspirator. And in that moment, Pennywise is like, and then scares him away from it, saying, "Oh, what?" I think he says is, "Who knows what could be in that?" At this point,
Mm-hmm.
which is removing his crutch a little bit. But also, this chapter is about how that crutch is not real.
Yeah.
And so, thanks, Pennywise, for your brutal but effective psychological measures to help me remove my my addiction to a thing that's actually doing nothing for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely something to the idea that Pennywise doesn't really have a good handle on human psychology in the like in the full sense. Like Pennywise understands fear,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe nothing else beyond it, and maybe he doesn't
Yeah,
understand that by forcing this guy to face his fear, he's actually just making this guy stronger.
that's a great point for sure. So as we get into the story, we have this little bit that I wanted to talk about a bit here. This was the place where they sold health. That was his mother's unstated but clearly communicated conviction. And with his body clock set at 11:30, Eddie had no suspicion that his mother might be wrong about that or anything else. Well, Mr. Keene sure put an end to that, he thinks now with a kind of sweet anger. And one of the big reasons I pulled this was that ending line there. The
Sweet
just
anger.
sweet anger, I think, is just a marvelous phrase.
Yeah, I love it. It's so great. And that's that's the vibe. That's why this part of the book. Well, there's a lot of emotions to it, but a big part of it, especially toward the end of this section, is this sort of righteous anger, righteous vicarious anger on behalf of Eddie, for the way he's been treated,
Mm-hmm.
for the way his mother has treated him, for the way Mr. Keene treats him here. This and they're like calling that a sweet anger just feels so accurate that like
Yeah.
when you've really been wronged and you know it, that is a very sweet anger.
Yeah, definitely. The other turn of phrase I wanted to talk to you about here just briefly is the use of his body clock set at 11:30, which is a really complicated way of saying he's 11 and a half years old.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really interesting because, once again, going back to this idea that we have of all these characters being on a precipice, being on a threshold, being on the verge of transitioning to something new, defining his age as not 11 but 11:30 on a 12-hour clock becomes really interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because he's close to midnight, he's close to transitioning to the next day or the next phase or the next whatever. Like, it's such a really fascinating, wonderful way. I said fascinating. Oh, I'm gonna do this to myself every time I hear the word now. What have I done?
I heard a good trick is every time you say it, you got to say fucking fascinating.
I'll do it. I'm gonna do it.
No matter what company you're in, you have to.
All right. Yeah, definitely. It's gonna work great. But I think it's just like that's a remarkable way of describing that, right? It is and you wonder if like that was intentional or not. I just like became immediately interested in this idea of like, oh, if we map their age out on a clock, then suddenly 12 becomes something new, and it's a perfect way of expressing how close to this transition these characters are.
Becomes the end of something, and what is it the end of? Well, the obvious answer is childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because I don't know that anybody really thinks of your 12th birthday as the end of childhood, but on the other hand, that doesn't sound wrong to me.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely felt more like more of something like a teenager when I was 12 and more of something like a kid when I was 11. Obviously it's a spectrum, there's no the numbers are just a made up demarcation, but it feels right. I didn't really think about it, by the way. I did, the idea of 11:30. I just was like, what a fun turn of phrase. But I do love that you've pointed this out, and I think you're totally right.
Well, that's why it jumped out to me, is because I said that exact same thing, as, oh, what a fun turn of phrase. And then my brain went, but wait,
Yeah.
there's more. And
Yeah. But
it went
why?
down
Yeah.
that whole
Yeah.
rabbit hole. Yeah. So we travel with Eddie back into 1958 as he visits the pharmacy to pick up his meds. On this particular day, Mr. Keen has decided that he's had enough and is going to tell Eddie the truth about his asthma meds. He calls him back in the back of the pharmacy to do so, which also has this unintended effect, or maybe intended effect, of absolutely scaring the shit out of young Eddie Kasprick. I love so much of this, Matt. Like, you already kind of prefaced this in the introduction, but the buildup of this moment, I think once again King is employing the use of dramatic irony here. We fully understand what Keen is about to reveal to Eddie, but he does not. And so the scene is laced with the irrational fears of a child, like, he's going to accuse me of stealing, even though that's ridiculous. Eddie knows for a fact he's never stolen anything. He's going to hurt me. Like, even the kind offer of an ice cream float from Mr. Keen seems menacing,
Yeah.
to Eddie. And King describes this as he felt scared in a way that was both vague and specific, which is another amazing turn of phrase.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I have this vague sense that this is an incredibly important scene in this book,
Mm-hmm.
without necessarily being able to explain why I have that sense. And that's what fascinates me about this scene in particular. Because it's this very mundane scene.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even that important to the plot, or I mean, maybe it will be. At this point, it doesn't seem like it. And it's also not like a vignette about a man doing just a truly, truly awful thing to a child. It's a man doing a kind of crappy thing to a child.
Yeah.
Mixed in with a kind of nice thing at the same time, weirdly. And like the lowness of the stakes actually are what make it interesting, because really
Mm-hmm.
it's just this adult kind of enjoying exercising power over this kid, enjoying using his advantage of age and social standing and so forth to just kind of fuck with the kid, not in a super aggressive, malicious way, but just he's just kind of enjoying messing with the kid. Or maybe it's not even, maybe that's not even what it is that bothers me about this, because like it's not like, oh, he's this sadist, Keen is a psycho. It's like, no, he just doesn't care.
Yeah.
And it's just like he's just devaluing Eddie and kind of enjoying watching him squirm a little bit. And
That's
all of that's it feels important to me.
Yeah, no, that's a great way of putting it, because I do think this choice of Keen's lies in this really interesting position. And we're jumping ahead a little bit here, but I do love later when Eddie says to himself, why would he lie? And the text says, it was only years later in the library that Eddie asked himself the more terrible question, why would he tell me the truth? Which is this really interesting thing, because it is true that Keen doing this for Eddie helps him discover the truth about his mother.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, overall a good thing. But I agree, there is a particular amount of nastiness to the way Keen chooses to do this. Like, this was not the way. Like, if you really were just like, I've had enough, this can't go on for too long, you call up Eddie's mom and you say, I've had enough, this can't go on anymore. I'm not going to fill this prescription for your son anymore. And I'm going to have a conversation with his doctor, and I'm going to do all these things through the channels that I feel a moral obligation to do these things through. But yeah, choosing to dish this information out and kind of just leave this truth bomb with Eddie and then send him on his way sucks, actually.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's like you're actually really helping me here, because like the thing that's sucks about the situation is that Keen is acting like he's done some moral feat worthy of praise by telling Eddie, and it's like, no, like you just laid this big like sort of incredibly difficult psychological, complicated, multifaceted issue at the feet of this 11-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're like, and I'm done dealing with this, dealing with this kid, and that's it. And it's like, wow, that was the laziest possible way of going about it, the most cowardly, in fact, because you're totally right. He knows he's going to get his head chewed off if he takes it up directly with the mom, so he just doesn't. And the best I can do to kind of defend there is like, well, if he doesn't tell the kid and he just tells the kid's mom, then the mom's just going to kind of intercept the information. And so the only way to really get the kid to know this truth is to tell the kid. But still, just everything about the tone of the scene is off.
Yeah. No, he's really playing up the "come on, I don't bite," and like even the ordering of the sweets, I think is like, it's not just because we're in Eddie's head that there is some menacing, uncomfortable vibes here. I think Keen is fostering those kind of vibes for sure.
There's also,
and I think you're right that it comes from the sense of power, that he is flexing this power he has over this child.
Yeah. And there's also the mention that he has licorice on his table, I believe, which at least for us, the reader, they give us this connection to the story previously about sort of this, darkness, this deep vein of darkness that runs through Derry. Just kind of subliminally remind us of that as we enter this scene.
That's a fantastic point. I love that. I mean, I definitely like caught the licorice reference, but just fully linking it back to, what that's doing is reminding us when this guy was a total fucking psychopath. That's wonderful. And I think that gets us to one of my favorite quotes in the section, which is this one here. The thought of a monster, some great monster lurking under the city where he had been born and where he had grown up, using the sewers and drains to creep from place to place. That was a frightening thought. And the thought of actually fighting that creature, of taking it on, was even more frightening. But somehow this was worse. How could you fight a grown-up who said it wasn't going to hurt when you knew it was? How could you fight a grown-up who asked you funny questions and said obscurely ominous things like, "This has gone on long enough"? And almost idly, a kind of side thought, Eddie discovered one of his childhood's great truths. Grown-ups are the real monsters. Isn't that remarkable? Like, I think one cool thing King does is he takes a statement like this, and like, maybe in your mind, you're like agreeing, this is awful, this is terrible, and but like comparing this to the things that Pennywise does, no way. And then perfectly after this, he moves us to the Patrick Hockstetter chapter, where, as we've already said, we are relieved when the great monster shows up. Is kind of a perfect way of making your thesis statement and then immediately supporting it with some evidence of like, actually the mundane can be worse. And obviously Patrick Hockstetter is not a grown-up, but I do think that chapter does a really great way of showing the way that his issues and his mental disability was not handled, and not, like, he did not get the help he needed from a system and a bunch of adults who were choosing not to see the problems that he had.
Yeah, and there's also, just to tie the mundane to the supernatural, like the adults are actually sort of instrumental in keeping this Pennywise charade going decade after decade by their sort of pigheadedness and blindness and cowardice, which is a kind of evil by omission, and also just like, I don't want to minimize, the evil of the monster clown, but like, because it's definitely super evil, like that's the point. But it is also kind of like a, panther or something. It takes some prey, it grabs a kid. Every once in a while it grabs a kid because it's hungry. It's simple. It's just hungry. Whereas adults, there's no end to the depravity that an adult human is capable of. I mean, think about like Bev's father. He hasn't like done anything yet, but there's some dark shit lurking in that man's soul.
My God.
That Pennywise isn't even interested in, because Pennywise just wants to kill. Very, very, very straightforward, I don't know. I feel like I'm going to come off sounding like I'm defending Pennywise. It's not really the intent. The intent is just kind of point out that, like, I actually think this is one of those interesting places where King juxtaposes this transcendent supernatural evil against quote unquote mundane evil, and actually makes the point that it's the mundane evil that really has the capacity for deeply troubling darkness.
Yeah. No,
You know.
fantastic point. I totally agree. Fucking fantastic.
Awesome.
Did it. You forgot. You already forgot.
I already forgot. I just was like, oh yes, that's really excited.
So Keen explains what we've known for a while. Eddie's asthma is psychosomatic, his medicine, nothing more than water. He says he normally doesn't see a problem in supporting the use of placebos because they work, they help patients feel better, but he has decided that Eddie's problem has crossed a line and he's stepping in. Eddie, of course, doesn't take this very well, being told, A, your mother's lying to you, and B, you might actually just be crazy, which is kind of where he goes in his head. Like, if you're telling me this is all in my head, then you're telling me you think I'm crazy, or I am actually crazy. So he initially rejects this whole thing. And that's when we get to the quote that we talked about earlier, but why would he lie? And that's the big question, Matt, I think that we have. And perhaps one of the things that when you said you weren't quite sure on this scene is, why is Keen doing this now, today?
Yeah. Because he claims something, well, you have friends now, kid.
Yeah.
And I don't really follow the logic. Maybe I'm just kind of missing the point that he's trying to make. But yeah, I don't really get why he chooses, because it's like, why say it now and why say it at all are related questions, but not the same question. And so yeah, like why do this? Is it just like we said a second ago that he just enjoys exercising his power, and this is a moment where he kind of gets to feel like a big shot and kick some kid in the head psychologically? I don't know. I don't understand really.
Yeah, and this is one of those moments where I'm so hesitant to do this, where I don't like to get over involved in the turtle or the white's presence and dictation of the story, right? Like, I think King does a very good job of making it very clear when in those moments where there is kind of direct intervention by the powers that be, and when there's not. But I do think there is something interesting to the idea here that the encounter with Keen drastically changes Eddie's life, then immediately being set up for an encounter with Henry, which the book textually tells us if Eddie had not had the encounter with Keen, the encounter with Henry would have possibly gone very different. He would have been able to slip away. Like, he makes this a textual thing, and then saying, okay, so we then lead from A to B to C, into a broken arm, into a confrontation to his mother, and to a thing where he basically allows for him and his club to stay together. You start to go like, did Keen wake up one morning and just have the strong urge to do this, just like Mike woke up one morning and had the strong urge to go buy a bike pump and a tire repair kit? Like, did that happen? I don't know.
Yeah. So I'll try to explain the leap of logic I'm about to make.
Okay.
That made me. These questions sort of make me think, why then does Eddie still carry around the respirator, or the what's it called?
Aspirator?
The aspirator, when he's in his mid-30s. Like, if all of that is true, if this was a sort of white takes bishop move, then why didn't it work?
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like I almost feel like Eddie's story is a tragedy in a way that the others' kids are not. Because Eddie's life, if we set aside Stanley, Stanley's life was good. It's just then he, snapped. Mm-hmm. Whereas Eddie's whole life has been kind of bad. And it's because he never really defeated this hypochondria. And it's like the moment with the aspirator and this revelation and this confrontation he's about to have with his mom, not to get ahead of us, but all of this feels like the story moment where Eddie triumphantly bestrides his fate and declares victory and changes his life. And no, none of that happens.
Mm-hmm.
He's basically the guy you would expect him to be if this had never happened, right? So something's got to happen to sort of reverse all of this.
Yeah.
Um, and that's in itself interesting. So to get back to what you were saying, you were asking like, is this a sort of cosmic divine intervention? And I'm like, well, if it was, wouldn't there be like consequences to it? I don't see the consequences, you know. And I think that's interesting. I don't know what to make of that exactly.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, my answer to this, your question would be, um, first of all, we don't know for sure yet. But second of all, I think jumping ahead a little bit, the encounter with his mother that ends the chapter, I think sets us up for this kind of idea, right? Because what happens in that encounter? Does he toss away his inhaler, um, and say, "I know this isn't real now. I'm not going to use this"? No, what he says was, "So I'll keep an eye out for Bill and the rest of my friends," Eddie said, "and keep right on using my asthma medicine." That's probably the best, don't you think? So he manipulates his mom into getting what he wants, but he also kind of structures a deal in which he keeps playing in La La Land,
Yeah.
with this stuff.
So he keeps playing this game with her for basically the rest of her life.
Yeah.
And the trade is that he gets to help the Losers Club with what they need to get done. And
Right.
it's a sort of sacrifice that he makes. I can see that. I do like that.
Yeah. So this kind of idea that which I think is very fitting with what we understand about Ka and the White and how they operate in King's universe, is this idea that like we are going to position things to where you can do the thing for us that we need right this very minute, and we're not actually concerned with like your growth as a person.
Uh-huh.
Only concerned as far as it gets us to what we want, which is for you to be able to encounter this monster and hopefully defeat it.
Yeah.
Um,
And while we're just on this, I want to say this is one thing I've always enjoyed and respected about King as a writer is that he never really does give, not never, but very, very rarely do you get the moment where the character bestrides their fate and strikes at the heart of evil and it's just over and they're permanently changed and they're better
mhm,
and you know they're no longer an addict. They're no longer, you know, they no longer have that flaw. They're just fixed now,
mhm.
because that's not how it happens ever
Yeah, yeah,
with people. And it's, you know, despite the fact that that's sort of the norm, the norm in storytelling, that's just not how people are. And I think King honors that. So
yeah,
it's very, very true to life that Eddie would continue to use the aspirator. It's just sort of like you're like, oh man, I wanted that to be the moment, you know.
yeah. It's also really interesting because, like, presumably Eddie had to go to a new doctor in a new town
Uh-huh.
and basically tell them, "I need a placebo."
Yeah.
Like, or maybe he just brought his own inhaler and the doctor was like, "Ah, yes,
Yeah.
okay."
Yeah,
Um
or got another prescription for. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, back in 58 though, Eddie sprints out of the store, still trying hard to deny what Keen has just told him. And I love this moment though, Matt, where he looks at his inhaler and sees the phrase "administer as needed" on the side of the medication. And he almost immediately reasons from this that, hey, wait a second. If there were actual medicine in there, there would probably be like a maximum daily dose or something,
Uh-huh.
that it would probably have some sort of order around how much you should use, and "administer as needed" is like the phrase that breaks him, and kind of forces him to reckon with the truth of the things that Keen has said.
Yeah, that's I really enjoyed that because it's the kind of thing where it actually does require the deductive reasoning of, you know, an adult basically, and
Yeah, yeah,
something he's barely capable of thinking of, but once he does, he can't really refute it and he can't go back to, you know, like a child might be able to sort of shake this off, you know, but he's just old enough that he's not going to be able to.
yeah.
So
So it's in this kind of daze, this truth bomb daze that Eddie bumps into Henry Bowers and his gang. And once again, just to reiterate it, King makes it pretty clear here that on any other day, Eddie would have just saw these guys and kind of slowly slipped back into the store and possibly escaped without them ever seeing him. But it is specifically because Keen's reveal to him has kind of knocked him off his axis. He instead sees them and freezes. And so the events carry on in this very specific way.
Yeah. I do. I mean, there is something very Ka about all this. I agree.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So the bullies, including Patrick Hockstetter, who we'll learn quite a bit more about here in a chapter, surround Eddie, and things seem pretty bad for him as Henry shoves rocks into his face and to his mouth. It seems this is very, very violent, very, very immediately until he's saved by an adult, because an adult shows up and you're like, oh, thank God. Except no, actually, not this time, Matt. This time Henry Bowers pushes back literally against the adult in question. The line that is crossed here, I think, is one that kind of I'll never forget experiencing for the first time, especially as a kid. You know, like I think the way the book is set up, and I think King builds to this brilliantly, is like things are bad. What is going to happen, Eddie? What is going to happen to Eddie? And then there's an adult there, and there is this kind of visible sigh of relief in the text of the book that is almost immediately tossed because Henry has crossed a line and now has assaulted an adult, you know?
Yeah. I agree. It's a fantastic story moment. I think we're also sort of we're gonna see a lot of this sort of thing this week. I think it's part of this gradual ramping up of the stakes and the intensity of what's been going on with Bowers and his gang. But this does feel like a bright line. This does feel like a point of no return of some kind.
Yep.
Where he's crossed the line from the sort of like, well, kids, they beat each other up and steal their lunch money, but this is passing on to adult criminality, basically.
Yeah, it is kind of remarkable that even like you could argue that from the very beginning, Henry was crossing lines. I mean, he carved an H into a child's stomach, but even that still felt like it operated in the realm of kids and their bullies. And then to be willing to say, no, actually, I'm going to operate outside of this kid and bully paradigm now, and I'm just going to start pushing and beating up anyone who stands in my way, including adults, is just a huge escalation. I agree.
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing how often has Patrick Hockstetter been mentioned before this point?
Not often.
Like, because I don't even remember the name, and I admit that's just because I can't remember names, like at the best of times. But it's just interesting to me how he went from being a character who was just not really in the story to very suddenly being this super important character, and then he's going to die real soon. So I just think that's an interesting story choice, and I'm not quite sure I've worked it out, because it's not like, oh, King forgot to put him in the story earlier. It's like, well, no, that's why there's a thing called drafts. If King had wanted to, he could have just inserted him in earlier. It's just like, no, he clearly wanted Patrick Hockstetter to show up relatively late and then to be taken out pretty quickly. And I think that's interesting.
It is. I mean, I do think it represents what you just said as kind of the ramping up of stakes and the ramping up of the deterioration. I think the book even calls it, of Bowers as a person. That suddenly he's palling around with this guy who is just considerably worse and less stable than any of the other people that he's been hanging out with. Like Patrick Hockstetter makes Belch Huggins look like a saint. Yeah. And it is. I mean, because you could argue, and I actually think the adaptations make choices like this where they kind of reduce or simplify the number of bullies that are around, just as a general reduction of the number of characters, which is a lot of adaptations make choices like that. But yeah, I mean, I think King is a kind of allowed to do this here and gets away with it, I think.
Yeah, no, I totally actually buy what you said, where like maybe this is not a kid he would have hung out with, at the beginning of the summer, but they sort of attract each other by their willingness to cross lines. And now they find each other more palatable.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So Eddie, for his sake, uses the momentary adult assault to escape, and he sprints away. And we actually, I think the line is asthma or no asthma. Eddie gave them quite a chase, and perhaps would have just lost them if not for stupid little Richard Cohen, father of horribly murdered Cohen child that dies earlier in 1985, drives right out on his trike in front of Eddie, accidentally tripping him, and so Henry catches up to him. And I want to talk to you about this bit here because I think this is really interesting. You think this is funny? Henry asked, sounding suddenly astounded rather than furious. You think this is funny? And did Henry also sound scared? Years later, Eddie would think, yes, scared. He sounded scared. Scared of what, Matt?
Yeah, I definitely made a mental note when this happened because, yeah, we're connecting to this idea that laughter um, is a weapon, a tool
Mm-hmm.
against fear, against these creatures that thrive on fear, like
Yeah.
Henry Bowers, like um, Tom Rogan, where there's the moment where Bev doesn't react the way he expects, and he's like, "Am I even real?" It's this like invalidation of his existence that she doesn't feel the fear that she's supposed to feel.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a huge thing that we're doing with the story.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it really is interesting to think about, why Henry is scared. That
Yeah.
that perhaps Henry, like, we're doing this really interesting thing with Henry Bowers, who is undoubtedly a terrible human being. We've talked about this many times, but the story has also primed us to pity him, and you know, this moment where he's has just enough like conscience left in him to be like, I think I'm going too far and it's scaring me a little bit
Mm,
here. Um,
mm.
that perhaps I'm losing myself a little bit here, and I'm like, I don't think he's scared of Eddie's laughing. I think he's just scared of himself a little bit here.
Yeah, maybe so. That's interesting. That's actually not the way that I took it, but I do like that because he's not completely gone at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that's one thing that I don't want to kind of lose sight of is we got that point of view from Henry a couple weeks ago, and it was interesting how even as he's doing these horrible things, it's just so clear that if he hadn't had the father that he had, he might have just grown up to be a kind of a normal guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it makes you feel bad for him, and it makes you think like, there but for the grace of God go I, maybe, because like it's very different from Patrick, actually, where there's
Mm-hmm.
just
Mm-hmm.
wiring differences there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Definitely.
just before we move on from this moment, I did love the idea that Eddie almost gets away from them because we've got this repeated beat that like actually Eddie is an athletic and healthy child,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's just complete fabrication that he's this fragile thing. He's more than capable of escaping these other larger boys. It just so happens that he gets a stroke of bad luck or perhaps divine intervention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I totally agree. It's it's really great. Like, it says asthma or no asthma, and
Mm,
like, no asthma
yeah,
is the
right,
answer there.
right.
So Eddie tries to twist away from Henry, but Henry shoves his arms up. It's really like messing me with it that these two characters named Eddie and Henry. By the way, like, I've almost I've almost called them Dean like 6 times
Yeah.
because Eddie and Henry are fighting with each other. Anyway, um, Henry shoves his arm up too far, fracturing it. And Matt, in the moment of the fracture, as Eddie screams in pain, he looks out, sees a lot of things very clearly. One of the things he sees is an old, kind of brushed out hopscotch grid turn into a turtle.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
It's the turtle. So why is the turtle showing up here? Like, it's funny because I really don't understand. The turtle shows up at weird times, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
turtle showed up just before Georgie got taken. It's like, is that necessarily a good thing? I mean, like there's two ways you could take this. You could be like, oh, the turtle's showing up because he's telling Eddie it's okay, I got the cops on the way. Or it's just like, I don't know, the turtle shows up before a lot of really bad stuff happens. The
Yeah.
turtle is an ambiguous symbol. Like I know what, Maturin and Dark Tower and all that. Within this book, the turtle is a pretty ambiguous symbol, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question is, did the turtle cause the break? You know, like if we need to position Eddie in a place where he temporarily pushes back against his mother to ensure he's involved with the rest of the group through the rest of the summer, was all this kind of laid out for us so that would happen the way we wanted it to, which is a really fascinating thought, because then you start to go, oh, so wait, the white uses Henry Bowers too?
Yeah.
that both sides are using this mean bully to get what they want. And I don't think there's anything textually that says that, right? But it certainly is introducing this idea, because I agree, like that the turtle here could be this comforting, like it's going to be okay, I have you. Or it could be like, ah, yes, my plan is coming to fruition here.
Yeah. It feels very of a piece with the whole Dark Tower idea of whatever makes for the best story is, and also that kind of ruthlessness, that kind of like total heartlessness that comes along with any time we speak of Ka, and very often when we speak of the white, it's like it's sort of gonna go for the greater good at the expense of these individual characters. Then that happens a lot in King's works. So
yeah,
I'd buy
totally.
that. I mean, I could even buy that, like the white sacrifices Georgie, knowing that it's going to enrage Bill, who's this incredibly capable warrior. Like that's a very dark thought, but the turtle does appear to Georgie, doesn't stop him from going outside.
Yeah, I mean, fair argument, right? I mean, there is something there that like, oh, we need our soldier Bill in this battle. How are we going to get him in this battle? Well, there's just, I bet if we take his brother away from him, and I think you talked about how Pennywise is in many times just animalistic. Like, did Pennywise seek out and hunt Georgie, or was he just having a jaunt through the sewer and saw a little boy across the way?
Yeah,
and went, snack.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Yeah. A lot of fun things to think about, for sure. So the police finally show up, a line that even Henry is not willing to cross yet. And he and the rest of his bullies scatter, leaving Eddie alone and giggling. He's laughing.
It's great. I really do love this.
Yeah. Let me read the quote. We can talk about it. I think it was the first real pain I ever felt in my life, he would tell the others. It wasn't what I thought it would be at all, and it didn't put an end to me as a person. I think it gave me a basis for comparison, finding out you could still exist inside the pain, in spite of the pain.
Yeah. I love this because Eddie, so ruled by the fear of bodily injury, that when this really serious injury finally happens to him, he's like, oh, this is it. This is what I was afraid of my whole life. I can live with this. And it's just funny to him. That strikes me as very realistic.
Yeah. And it, again, is another argument for like why a force for good would want this event to happen, right? It's like, oh, we need Eddie to kind of get over his fear. Let's give you an example of one hurt. So maybe you're less afraid of getting hurt again when I really need you to fight. But to your other point, this is the tragedy that is Eddie, right? Because this happened, but it didn't change him fundamentally going forward into the rest of his life. He still acts like he's a fragile person that couldn't survive any pain despite this happening.
Yeah, right. I mean, I do wonder if part of the price for all of this is that, when he gets this magical amnesia, which protects him from like, the madness of it, it also, the cost is it also takes away all these memories where he had these learning experiences that he should have carried forward into his life, that should have shaped him as an adult, but they were all taken away from him. I mean, that actually, now that I've said that out loud, that sounds pretty straightforwardly plausible as an explanation for why he is the way he is as an adult. Is he just can't remember all these important things that happened to him.
Yeah, yeah. But I do like, I think one of the things we said at the very, very beginning of the book was it is interesting the ways in which some people were unable to break free of that central childhood trauma that defined them. And then you have people like Ben who seem to have.
Mhm.
And we really haven't got a definitive answer for the why of that yet. Like what is
True.
the difference fundamentally between them?
Yeah.
Um so yeah, I mean, we'll see, right?
Yep.
So Eddie passes out, and after a brief moment of waking up to find Pennywise itself driving his ambulance, he remains that way until much later.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of neat how Eddie's in this hallucinatory liminal state for the next while, where
Yeah.
the clown keeps showing up around him, never actually doing anything harmful, just kind of haunting his dream space.
Yeah. No, yeah, and it forces you to like be like, is this just Eddie imagining? Is Pennywise actually here in
Right.
his dream space fucking with him? Both?
Right.
Yes? Who
Yeah.
knows?
Yeah.
So we cut to the hospital where Eddie's mother is predictably beside herself, and Eddie's doctor, a man named Dr. Handor, is trying his absolute best to keep her at bay. The description of Handor, I think, is just perfect here, Matt. I love this so much. He was a skinny, limp looking man with a little mustache that hadn't grown very well, and which, in addition, had been clipped unevenly, so it was longer on the left side than the right. He looked nervous. Eddie remembered what Mr. Keene had told him this morning and felt a certain sorrow for Dr. Handor. I love the detail of his mustache. It's the perfect character defining trait of this kind of weak-willed man who can't
Yeah.
even clip his mustache correctly.
Yeah, I agree. It's a great it's using a stereotype very efficiently.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, he's just a weak, pathetic guy. I love the dynamic between him and the nurse, who is clearly like a stronger person, trying to sort of silently guilt him into doing the right thing and failing to do so.
Yeah. So, of course, no one can keep Sonia out when she wants to, and the doctor is forced to set Eddie's arm with her there, shrieking. And I love this part so much, Matt. He looked at his mother, seeing her clear in his pain. Each flower on her Lane Bryant dress, the sweat stains under her arms where the pads she wore had soaked through, the scuff marks on her shoes. He saw how small her eyes were in their pockets of flesh. And now a terrible thought came to him. Those eyes were almost predatory, like the eyes of the leper that had crawled out of the basement at 29 Nebolt Street. Here I come. That's all right. It won't do you any good to run, Eddie.
Yeah.
I love that. The image of his mom transforming into that monster.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I mean, it's I think it's interesting later on we're going to see Bev hears her father's voice in the voice of the clown, and here Eddie sees his mom's face in the face of the clown. And it's so interesting how for a child, your parent is both the person you love the most and also potentially the worst monster in your life. And
Yep.
at least in this case, she thinks that she's doing everything for him.
Hmm.
It's so heartbreaking.
Yeah, I agree. So Eddie dreams that his friends come to visit him and are sent away by his mother. It turns out that this is, pretty much what happened.
Mhm.
And Eddie gets most of the details right too, with Bill being the one that comes the closest to standing up to her. Even kind of talks back against her briefly. I do think there's an interesting parallel here that's worth kind of exploring a bit. Henry pushing back against the Good Samaritan that tried to intervene on Eddie's behalf and crossing a line with dealing with adults, but then both Bill and eventually Eddie's pushing back against his mother. Once again, a child pushing back against an adult in a different way. I think that's interesting, right?
Yeah.
Are you with me here?
Yeah. Totally. I think, a threshold was crossed in both cases by being willing to take on a personal risk in standing up to an adult. You're staking out a position as something like an equal, or at least someone to be taken seriously by that adult. Um, and, in this case, it kind of doesn't work, although it kind of does. Like, he makes enough of an impression that I think it matters. Now, I think there's also an interesting something to be said about the idea that, Keen's earlier sort of casual attitude toward blowing up Eddie's fragile psychological coping mechanism, um, is related to the idea that Keen doesn't see him as a full person or a person worthy of respect. And the only way to sort of get that respect from an adult is to sort of stand up to them in this way.
Mm. Yeah, no, I like that. I like
And
that a lot.
so the dynamic here throughout this whole chapter has a lot to do with the respect that you sometimes have to fight for as you're growing up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also I just took at face value that he had psychically witnessed his friends confronting his mom with, just a little kef between friends.
Yeah, I mean, it's too close to being accurately what happened
Yeah.
to not. I think there are some interesting m- differences in the details. I think in his dream, like Bev is wearing a dress, which he notes specifically is way different from how she normally dresses, and I don't think we see that in the real version of this scene,
Hmm.
which is just an interesting detail where you're like, huh, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Is he just feminizing her a bit because he has a crush on her? I don't know.
Probably.
Yeah. Of course, the other big difference then is the dream has a dancing clown in it
Yeah.
who is cheering on as Sonia one by one rejects all Eddie's friends.
Yeah. It's great.
So from here, Matt King makes a wonderful choice, I think, to shift the perspective of this chapter to Sonia Kasperek. This technically breaks the rule of our structure, right? Right now, we're supposed to be experiencing adult Eddie retelling these events to the rest of the losers from his recently recovered memory. And yet somehow we're able to jump into Sonia's head here for a few pages. And King will do this again next chapter where we break from Bev's point of view to get kind of the full history of Patrick Hockstetter. And I think it's the right decision here. I think it's great. And I think we're coming up on my favorite part of this whole chapter. And this is one of those things where I'm like, oh, this is what people mean when they say there are no hard and fast rules in writing, right?
Hmm.
Like sometimes you just got to do what the story is demanding of you. And like you can think of a less assured writer who is like looking at the sequence and be like, oh, I really want to tell things from Sonia's point of view now, but oh, my structure, it just like that's not how I'm writing this. And King is just like, it's fine. It doesn't matter. Who
Yeah.
cares? We're gonna be in Sonia's head now. Who
Yeah.
cares? And just it's 100% the right decision. It enhances the scene. Getting to see this stuff from her is great. And like I writers,
Yeah.
don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to break with your structure if it just helps make your
Yeah.
scene work better.
Just needs to happen. Yeah. I mean, not only what you just said, is it so delightful to observe this from her point of view, it also helps us that it's not from Eddie's point of view, because it
Mhm.
allows us to see him as the kind of black box that she sees him, and to see how
Yeah.
he seems from the outside, because he's, internally quaking in his boots.
Yeah.
But the fact that he's able to portray this strength is what really matters. And we wouldn't
Yeah.
have really known that if we had only seen it from the inside.
I agree. That fantastic point. Totally agree. Fucking fantastic.
Great. I feel so smart today.
So anyway, Sonia goes to check on her son and is almost immediately disturbed by him. It says there was something in her son's pale face which was not blurred with pain or anxiety, but instead bore an expression she could not remember ever having seen there before. It was sharp somehow, sharp and alert and set. What a great way to start this whole part.
Yeah. Makes me so happy. I mean, because you know what's going to happen. You don't know how it's going to kind of unfold, but it's going to be good either way.
Yeah. I really love the way King kind of expertly draws Sonia as a character here, though. Like this woman who we see is mad that Eddie has friends in general, but especially mad at who they are. We
Mm.
have. I think her racism really shows itself here. Like the idea, and Eddie even reasoned that this would happen too. This idea that one of them is black, and the way King writes Sonia's racism is I think just really perfect, because she's this perfect kind of would perhaps consider herself progressive in the 50s person who was like, look, I think these people have every right to ride on whatever buses they want and eat lunch wherever they want, and should not be made to sit in N-word heaven at the movies, unless they bother white, and I love the parenthetical here, unless they bothered white women, people.
Mhm.
But I believe in the bird theory where blackbirds fly with other blackbirds, not with the robins. And it's this wonderful, like, she thinks she's being not racist, right?
Yeah.
Like, while also dropping the N-word like 6 times in
Yeah.
this paragraph, she's also like, no, I'm for all this equality stuff, but don't
Yeah.
hang around with my son.
Yeah. I also love that, and by love, I obviously mean sarcastic, that like people used to actually say stuff like the bird theory, and it's like,
Yeah.
that's not a theory. That's just you being racist. That's not
Yeah.
like, there's nothing behind that. Anyway, yeah, I love this sort of character where like they've got everything so perfectly and clearly organized in their mind that you almost like envy their mental clarity, except however, it's all in service of just like being a crappy person and propping up these crappy attitudes. And
Yeah.
and actually, there's a huge amount of self delusion happening too. So it's not like
Yeah.
I don't actually envy.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I love that. I always do love when King goes into the head of one of these people who just has this elaborate worldview that makes total sense to them, and you're just like, oh my god, you suck so bad.
He's so good at it. Like, he's good at it to the level of I've had to constantly question myself and be like, does King think these things? And the answer is no, of course not. Of course he doesn't. But like, he's just, I mean, this is back to you and the way one of your favorite things about him is how he understands psychology so well. Like, he just gets that this is the way these people think. Like, he reads about them, he studies them, and he just gets them, I think.
Yeah. Well, by the way, this is one of my favorite things about writing, not just reading, but like taking on a character who's wildly different from you. It can be very freeing, especially if they're a villain who
Yeah.
is you need them to think and say and do things that you would never do. It can be very liberating to simulate them and work through those thoughts on your own. Like that's so fun. One of the most fun parts of writing, actually.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. So Eddie has one thing and one thing only to say to her. You sent my friends away. And then we get this. Eddie's eyes seem to grow somehow. The flecks of gray in them seemed actually to be moving like racing storm clouds. She became aware suddenly that he was not in a snit or having a poopy or any of these things. He was furious with her, and Sonia was suddenly scared because something more than her son seemed to be in this room. So once again, we have to be like, oh, is this the turtle? And this is actually kind of what I was talking about, Matt, when I talked about how when you introduce ideas of like divine intervention and powers intervening in the story to dictate it, and I resist that in certain places. Like, I don't think this needs to be the turtle or the white being here in this room. I think this presence in this room is his friends and the impact his friends have had on strengthening him as a human being. I think it can just be this mundane power that being loved and respected and admired by a group of people can have on you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, or at the very least, I want to, agree. I like that. I'll say it that way because, yeah, the idea that it's just like, oh yeah, the turtle gave him strength in this moment. It's like, oh, okay, so it's not actually his strength and it's not earned, and it's. I don't like that. I like the idea that this is a reflection of the strength that he personally has gained from his friends.
But I guess the question is that wishful thinking on our part because we like it better, or is that what King is actually going for here? What do you think?
I mean, I think I could probably argue the case either way is the truth, but I think I actually do come out slightly on the side that we were right, and the reason is like he is terrified the whole time that he's talking to her.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like he has something supernatural sort of just like, take over for him and just win the argument. It's him, and he's mastering his fear the whole time, and he gets through it. And like just the way we see that happen at the very end of this section, it's like I just feel like he gets credit for all of that.
Yeah.
That's my
No,
feeling.
I agree with you. I agree. I do think maybe it's a little bit wishful thinking, but I think there's enough evidence to support that wish that I'm gonna say it is the intended read of the scene.
Yeah, there you go.
So Eddie, with this presence, turtle or no, performs wonderfully here. Matt standing strong against his mother, calling out her fake manipulative crying, pointing towards the truth of her fear of being left alone, even admitting to her what Dr. Keene told her and that he believes it. So we see Sonia shift in this moment to being scared for her son, to being scared of her son. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, this is an amazing sort of evolution over just like moment to moment. This scene,
Yeah,
um, we could have spent a whole week on this scene, right?
I know.
It's so great. Like, and like you almost feel bad for her too, because there are moments in
Yeah.
here where she's sort of telling this narrative to herself about how um she did it all for him,
Hmm.
and it's like you buy that she thinks that
Yeah.
anyway, even if you
Yeah.
don't buy that it's true, you know.
Yeah, totally. Like her reasoning, I think is wrong, but like relatable, right? Like something I don't think we learned that Eddie almost died when he was 5 years old. That he got very very sick and almost died, and she had just lost her husband not long before that, and so it developed this very understandable like extreme fear to the idea of the life around you, the people that love you are fragile and could leave you at any moment, and that builds and builds and builds into this psychosis that ends in you deciding that actually here sometimes it's better for a child, particularly a delicate child like Eddie, to think he was sick than to really get sick,
Yeah,
which is just insane. But like Sonia does a very good job of kind of drawing that through line for you, at least in her own mind. I
yeah,
think one of the things that's great in the scene is that like she has this perfect explanation for him that would get him to understand everything, and he is so powerful in this moment that she doesn't even open her mouth to even try to give it to him.
yeah. I do think it's good because Sonia runs the risk of being ridiculous,
Yeah.
someone you don't take seriously as a character.
Hmm.
And there are specific moments in here that make you realize, like, oh, I can sort of see a person sort of almost needing out of self-protective, uh, uh, desire to not just go crazy, to make such decisions, even if they aren't rational. You can at least understand them.
Yeah. Yeah. I do like here, Matt, that Eddie isn't like, well, it's not that he's not mean. He's just like, I love that the book says he speaks softly and implacably, right? Like he just is making his terms clear, just making himself very clear in this moment. Basically saying that he knows that she knew the medicine was fake, but won't push her on that, won't demand her come clean on that. Just kind of brilliantly manipulates her into that line we talked about earlier in the episode. I'll
Mhm.
keep a keen I'll kind of keep an eye out for Bill and the rest of my friends, Eddie said, and keep right on using my asthma medicine. That's probably best, don't you think?
Yeah, love
Wonderful.
it. Snookered her. It's so fun.
And I feel like the use of words there, that's probably best, don't you think? Feels like such a parent to child line.
Mhm.
Like it just feels like the perfect reversal of this whole thing. I love it.
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
So later that night, the losers returned to the hospital as Eddie knew they would. King, in this moment, I think this is a really interesting flourish here that he sets up a threatening rainstorm in this part of the chapter. This ominous building of something of a storm coming as the losers file into Eddie's room, file in solemnly. We see, um,
Mhm.
and we see here. I love this. He was seeing them he was seeing in them what his mother had seen in them that afternoon, that odd combination of power and helplessness. The yellow stormlight lay on their skins, making their faces seem ghost-like, distant, shadowy. We're passing over, Eddie thought, passing over into something new. We're on the border, but what's on the other side? Where are we going? Where? I just fucking love it, man.
Yeah.
I fucking love it. I just love everything about this.
Yeah, yeah, it's great because this is like a tonal expression of the building of stakes and intensity.
Hmm.
that we've been building over the last few chapters. It makes everything feel magical in a way that it maybe hasn't fully felt magical up until this point. And again, this idea that we're passing over into something new, it reminds me of, the 11 and a half, going on 12 comment, where it's like there is some threshold that's being crossed, and that threshold is, yes, it is confrontation with the evil clown, but it's also the threshold of adulthood.
Yep. So the group catches Eddie up on what's been happening. They're not making silver bullets anymore, Matt. It was too hard to make a bullet. Instead, they're just making silver balls, slugs, as we called them earlier. They'll shoot them out of a slingshot, which you correctly guessed. Good job, Matt.
Yep.
Pat yourself on the back.
Okay.
And what's more here, we learned that Bill wants Bev to be the one to do so. When they tested their aim at the dump earlier, Bev was the best at it. Was she a little Susanna Dean here, I think?
Yeah. She aims with her eye.
There was this, I don't know if you caught it, but there was this moment on last week's episode when I was like making the argument that that each and every one of the losers brings something important and special to the group. And I was going through them one by one, and I got to Bev, and I was almost about to say this, and then I remembered at the last minute that hadn't quite happened yet. And so I just didn't say anything for Bev. And just is like, every one of these characters is important and brings something unique and valuable to the group. And then I just kind of yada past Bev. It was like, I hope he didn't notice that.
No, I didn't. Well, to the extent that I noticed anything, it was like, well, obviously Scott can't fully tell me what they bring to the final confrontation, because that's not to be revealed yet.
Okay, good.
So
good. I just didn't want our listeners to think I was intentionally disrespecting Bev.
I see. Okay.
So Bill decides they should all sign his cast, but Eddie in this moment knows it's more than just a gesture between friends. It's a contract. Ooh.
I love that. So are they going to need to make a new contract as adults, you think?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know.
I don't know.
I love how we're taking all these things that are just like defining childhood things. I think like breaking your arm and having your friends sign your cast is just like a thing that happens. Not to every child, obviously, but like, I don't know, how many casts did you sign as a kid? I think I signed several, and I broke my arm when I was a kid and had several people sign mine.
Yeah, I didn't break anything. I'm sure I signed casts. I don't remember how many, maybe a couple, not a ton.
Yeah.
But
so
yeah,
we're just taking these normal, everyday, mundane kid things and then attaching this great power and meaning to them, which is just part and parcel of what this whole book is doing.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's totally true. Yeah.
And we get this part here. These were his friends, and his mother was wrong. They weren't bad friends. Maybe he thought there aren't any such things as good friends or bad friends. Maybe there are just friends, people who stand by you when you're hurt and who help you feel not so lonely. Maybe they're always worth being scared for and hoping for and living for. Maybe worth dying for too, if that's what it has to be. No good friends, no bad friends. Only people you want, need to be with. People who build their houses in your heart. I don't have anything to say about this except for I love it.
It feels like a passage that is something like a thesis statement or something at the heart of the book, something that King feels very strongly needs to be said.
I agree. And I do think it's a really, like, the idea that they're like, not just that there's no such thing as bad friends, but there's no such thing as good friends either. There's just like, because this friendship is going to get all these people in a very dangerous situation that will end with one of them killing themselves 27 years later.
Yeah.
And the rest of them being forced to return to this thing and risk their lives and potentially lose them. So this idea that, I wouldn't call them good friends. They're just my friends.
Yeah, that's what friends are.
Yeah. So the chapter ends with that promised storm not coming. Actually, we learn that it takes another day for that, at least, which moves us perfectly into our second chapter.
Yep.
Chapter 17, another one of the missing, the death of Patrick Hochstetter. As previously stated by the text itself, this is a Bev chapter, and it's Bev's turn to tell the story. She begins scared and shaking uncontrollably and lights up a cigarette. Oh no, Tom.
Tom.
Tom's gonna be mad.
Yep. Yeah, we haven't seen much of Tom lately.
No, he got to Derry, and then that's where we left him, in that hotel.
Yeah, that just makes me feel more anxious.
So Bev thinks back to that day as she was walking through the Barrens in her short jean shorts. And Matt, I think we once again I think King is doing this quickly and immediately. The Bev section revolves around sexuality, specifically her encroaching womanhood. And we get this, I would say, the most uncomfortable passage in the chapter, except, we got so much more. But we get this first. She had become more conscious of her body over the last year, over the last 6 months actually, as it began to curve and become more womanly. The mirror was one reason for this heightened consciousness, of course, but not the main one. The main one was that her father seemed even sharper just lately, more apt to use his slapping hand or even his fists. He seemed restless, almost caged, and she was more and more nervous when she was around him, more and more on her mark. It was as if there was a smell they made between them, a smell that wasn't there when she was in the apartment alone, one that had never been there when they were in it together. Not until this summer. I hate it so much.
Yeah, that's the most uncomfortable possible way of talking about this. That's yeah. Speaking about like stuff in this book making you anxious, like the book has so King loves to tell you what's going to happen. One thing that we have not really been let in on is where things are going with Bev and her dad.
Sure.
I can't remember any time that it has been even really particularly hinted, like, where's this gonna go? How bad is this gonna get? And how does it end? You know, it makes me very anxious to anticipate the places that this dynamic could lead.
And the most disturbing part of it seems to be that Tom, or not Tom, sorry, that Bev's father is aware of it as well. You know, I didn't call it out in this. I stopped the quote too soon, but like he's restless, he's caged. He's also not hanging around the apartment as much too.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's going out more, you know, spending more time doing his bowling league and other stuff because he feels this thing.
Yeah.
And that's so disgusting, right? That like, oh, I've got to be careful because I feel my daughter's becoming a woman and I'm feeling this thing. It's like, God.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm like uncontrollably shuddering right now. It's so fucking gross.
Yeah.
So Bev gears up to tell her story, but it starts with giggling. Once again, we have laughing here, Matt. A lot of laughter by our characters here.
That's a good point. Yeah, there's a lot of laughter coinciding with terrible stuff that it's a kind of talisman against that terrible stuff.
Yeah. So the reason she's laughing though, Matt, is that she was heading down to the dump to practice with her slingshot, and instead of finding her friends, she finds Henry Bowers and his gang there. And what are they doing? Well, their pants are down and they're lighting their farts on fire.
I knew they weren't bad kids after all.
Hey Matt, you're a doctor.
Uh-huh.
Can you light your farts on fire?
Not, you know, I've never tried, and I'm a little ashamed to say that. Because
I'm not asking if you have real world experience. I'm asking scientifically, would that work?
Oh, could you?
Yeah, could you? Not have you?
I don't see why not.
Is there enough flammable gas in there to catch fire?
I'm gonna go with yes. I think that it's probably pretty flammable.
Okay. Thank you. This has been Matt's Science Corner.
Yeah, but now you've got me curious. I got to look up whether this is a real thing or not, because I was just taking at face value that Stephen King had tried this as a child and thus knew it was possible, and was now conveying his knowledge to us.
I'm just wondering if it's one of those things that's like tipping cows, where we've only ever heard it or experienced it in a story, but it's actually not a thing at all.
Yeah, I don't know. So when they say like 11 feet or whatever, I'm like, no.
Yeah, I mean that. I think they were definitely just lying. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah. Also, like anytime you fart, there's a lot of stuff that comes out that's not, gas. And I just, they're just like farting in each other's faces. And
Yeah, like poop.
yeah,
There's a little bit of poop.
these boys are all gonna have pink eye, is what I'm saying.
Would be the least of their problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
So once again, I picked this quote up here just because, just so much of what King's doing with Bev here is around, as we said, sexuality, but also love. It's a she knew she was too young to love a boy, too young to have anything but crushes, but she loved Bill just the same.
Yeah.
So this is ever present in Bev's life, I think.
I like this expression too, because I mean, we've talked a bit about this off and on throughout the story that like we both had some pretty hefty crushes in our younger years, and I don't really particularly think there is like a bright line, between love and a crush. I think it's all part of that same gradient that growing up is.
Yeah, for sure. So as previously mentioned, instead of finding her friends playing at the dump, she finds Henry Bowers and his gang, and as said before, they're naked from the waist down with their pants around their ankles, lighting each other's farts on fire. And so 11-year-old Beverly Marsh sees a penis for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Gross. Sorry, Bev.
Yeah,
they're weird. They're weird looking,
and not the best particular context either.
No, definitely not. I do appreciate Bev's kind of adorably childish initial response is Bill has one of those. Like that's like there's a lot of this chapter that's extremely disturbing, but I find that kind of adorable. It's just like you see a penis for the first time, it's like, oh, the guy I have a crush on has one of those, and I don't know what that means because I'm just on the verge of this sexual awakening and I don't understand any of it at all. And it's great.
Yeah, this all feels very authentic. I agree.
Mm-hmm. But Bev has struggling to laugh, and I love how King explores her laughter here. It says she was laughing because she knew of no other way to cope with what she had seen. It had something to do with seeing the boys' things, but that was by no means all or even the great part of what she felt. She had known, after all, that boys had things, the same way she knew girls had different things. This was only what you might call a confirmed sighting. But the rest of what they were doing seemed so strange, so ludicrous, yet at the same time so deadly primitive that she found herself, in spite of the giggling fit, groping for the core of herself with some desperation. What? That is something, right? Like this mixture between this is hilarious and funny, and so I'm laughing uncontrollably, but also there's something here that is so like just like I love that phrase, deadly primitive.
Yeah.
It's such a fascinating encapsulation of this boys, fooling around amongst themselves in this kind of way that to a young girl that hasn't fully experienced the world yet seems dangerous to her.
Yeah. And I think it is dangerous to her. I mean, I don't think she's off base in thinking that if, to skip ahead very slightly, if Bowers had caught her witnessing what she witnessed, he might have done something, truly horrific to her. And that's all part of, King loves to remind us that sexuality and violence are kind of wound up together in our brains. And so there's something, again, to the transition of age. Like if she'd seen this a year or two ago, it might have had a much sillier, more harmless sort of vibe to it. Bunch of 8 or 9 year olds standing around lighting their farts is like childishly innocent, whereas a bunch of 11 going on 13-year-olds doing it, it's like upsetting.
Yeah.
And I think it's so interesting. There seems to be a lot of stuff this week where it's hard to nail down like why it's upsetting. That seems to be happening with us over and over. At least I'll speak for myself. I feel like I've had a harder time articulating why something bothers me a few times this week. And I think that's part of the genius of this author is this ability to kind of identify these places in our minds where we don't want to go. And we don't have an explanation for why. We just have a feeling. And then he drags us there anyway.
Yeah, and this is one of those times that like I wish we had a female co-host that could, you know, maybe help us get into the mind of Bev a little bit more, because something that struck me about this, and I'm not even sure if I was right here, is this idea of like a girl being forced to learn about the dangers of sexuality, in that, you know, in the world we live in, there are men like these men, that are going to want to harm people sexually, right?
Hmm.
Like there is like, I think a quick line between like a bunch of drunk stupid frat kids hanging out that see a girl walking along the street and decide, oh, I'm gonna go mess with her, to this kind of behavior here, and escalating into something like that, you know.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Because I mean, you have to assume that like there is a point in every woman's life where like they start to feel the danger that exists, in this world around them, as they make this same transition that Bev is making. Because I don't feel like that's just something that like all women instinctively have at like 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, right? I feel like it's something that as you transition into adulthood, like you start to feel in ways that
Hmm.
you've never felt before.
I mean, you're right that it's not something that I have put a ton of thought into, but you're right that yeah, I agree that I wish that we had the female perspective on this particular point. Actually,
Yeah, maybe we'll call up some friends
yeah,
and get that perspective in the future for sure.
yeah.
So Vic and Belch both announce they have to go. They've got jobs to do, and they walk by, and we leave Patrick and Henry here now alone. And there's this feeling of, oh, it's like with the other two gone, and we're left with the two crazies. It's like, oh, things are about to get more serious in some way.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, the scene is such a weird combination of like funny and intense at the same time.
Yeah.
Um, we know Bev gets out of the situation. We also know that Patrick is about to die.
Yeah, yeah. The chapter title gives that away, as well as that's been reinforced several times for sure.
So like we kind of know that some bad stuff's going to happen. So it is very intense, but also I guess there's this absurdity to it all that I find um it gives the whole section a very interesting and unique tone.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. So Patrick and Henry light a few more farts, and then Patrick says, "Let me show you something," and we are forced to witness Patrick jerking off both himself and Henry. Henry seems to let this happen until Patrick offers to escalate it to oral, at which point Henry smacks him off. This, Matt, is a difficult section of the book to talk about, and it won't be the last one, by the way. And so I think what we have to do here when we like approach a scene like this is kind of step back and before we even get into the analysis of it, ask the question of like, okay, what are we doing with this? Why are we doing this thing specifically? Because it's a lot. It's definitely a lot.
Well, I hate to make a cookie cutter type of analysis, but I can't help but say that this just reminds me of this dichotomy that King has drawn and utilized over and over, where he distinguishes between sort of healthy, manifestations of sexuality and unhealthy animalistic manifestations. And for those
Hmm.
of you who may be only catching us in the middle of our journey, we have come to call this the red versus the pink, because that's kind of how he symbolizes these things in the Dark Tower, among other
Hmm.
places, where red is like something akin to romantic love, or uh, a high Kamala, as you might call it. There's a sort of spiritual expression of togetherness, versus the pink, which is the low Kamala, the animalistic, the absent of the spiritual, just about getting off. And I think this scene that we're witnessing here, I think what we're doing with it has little to nothing to do with like homosexuality, and everything to do with just the idea of like inhuman sexual gratification, um, to no greater purpose. this idea that King is always returning to, and you know, sort of subjecting Bev to unwillingly witness this thing happening, which, you know,
Yeah.
this very very much pink axis thing,
Yeah.
and I think that's what we're doing. You know, I think the fact that it's, you know, 2 11-year-old boys is sort of circumstantial, and mostly it's the bigger, more high level
Yeah.
thing. Um,
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I always love the red versus pink stuff when you go there, and I think it does work in this particular case. I think, you know, I think the way to look at it is to look at it from. I mean, obviously this is a Bev chapter. We're doing something here specifically for Bev, and so to look at what's happening here, Bev is witnessing this thing. What does this mean? You know, I think we've said from the very beginning of the book that Bev's sexuality, and the abuse of men in her life and the ways in which they abuse her has been like her whole deal. Like that's been the defining characteristic of the character for us. And now we have the situation here. You know, we have the first time she witnesses a man's sex organ is this childish yet quote deadly primitive act, and then the first time she witnesses sexual activity is a man doing this boy doing this to another boy, and him responding violently to that act.
mhm,
And I think, you know, getting back to what you said earlier about how sexuality and or sex and violence are so linked, these things are specifically linked in Bev, right? You know, I think it's no accident here that Bev, in this moment where this is all happening, Bev is absolutely convinced that Henry has spotted her and is in that very moment walking up to the car to hurt her, and then, or she says, or worse, you know, stick that thing in her, which is what we were talking about before of Bev realizing that that sex can be violent and dangerous and off and cruel, and so, you know, I think you can draw a line from this moment, uh, combined with her father, to the person we saw in those introductory chapters, the person who, you know, sex and violence are so intrinsically linked to her that she thinks that's just normal.
mhm.
um it all can start here, this act right here.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
And as I agree with you on like the homosexuality of it, you know, like I think it is. I think it like we chose to make this a homosexual act, right? And we know Derry's history with homosexuality isn't great. As like the question, are either of these kids gay? I don't know. Maybe like it doesn't matter. I think what matters is actually that Henry reacts violently to the idea that he possibly could be, right. That like he could be labeled with that, whether he is or not. He reacts violently to that label, striking Patrick and threatening to kill him if he tells anyone that he liked what was done to him, because he didn't like it at all.
Yeah.
I think that's the important part, is not whether they are, but their perception of if they are is unacceptable.
Yeah, yeah, it's just purely a source of fear and threat,
Hmm. Hmm.
to Henry. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, disturbing sequence, obviously weird. Obviously, anytime you see children doing sexual acts in a book, it's a little weird and a little uncomfortable. But I do think there is purpose here for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah. I 100% purpose, yes. That
Mhm.
all I mean, it's such a persistent theme throughout this book, this idea of the, you know, increasing awareness of sexuality of these young characters, and often in these very uncomfortable ways.
Yeah,
You know, we've talked a lot about how King is reminding us of all these aspects of childhood that we had forgotten. And I mean, your childhood awakening to sexuality and piecing together these things, as you hear rumors about how sex works and so forth,
yeah.
that's all quite uncomfortable, and also stuff that we very happily memory hole and never think about again.
Yeah.
So I think that's another thing. I mean, that's what he's doing. That's it's not all just the memory of the wallpaper on your childhood bedroom. Some of it is uncomfortable memories that you are kind of glad that you forgot.
Yeah, and that you do experience, right? Like
Hmm.
that's just part of it. That's part of this whole weird thing. And it is like I think, uh, not both Patrick and Henry are a little bit older than our characters, right? Like they've both been held back in school at least one time, I think a couple times. I think they're both 13, which is not to say, oh, at 11 it's disgusting, but at 13 it's fine. It's just to say that, like, we've talked so much about our characters being on the verge of transitioning to this new thing, and here we have two characters that, age-wise at least, have already kind of made that transition.
Right.
And so she's witnessing older men do this thing.
Right.
So Henry says also that if he tells anyone, that he'll tell about Patrick's refrigerator. This is the same fridge that King was nice enough to show us as Bev kind of walked her way into this situation and was a little creeped out by, and we're immediately like, what about the fridge? What? And then, of course, the reality is absolutely awful. Patrick says nothing, and Henry storms off. Bev finally comes out of her hiding place and begins to leave, but then she spies Patrick standing in front of his refrigerator, kind of doing a weird little ritual, she describes it as, and curiosity gets the best of her. She stays and watches, and now I think we're primed for this. Patrick is alone. Bev is watching him. His death is coming. We know it.
Oh boy, I have to say I didn't realize that King was going to make the supernatural murder of a child seem kind of satisfying.
Yeah,
but here we are.
Who knew that what he did to Henry would be like the least awful thing he does in this week's reading.
Yeah, this definitely opened a door I wasn't expecting to open into this upcoming segment.
Yeah. So we have to get into this because before Patrick's death comes, King has us spend some time with him, and we see here that he is indeed crazy, and not just in like the colloquial way, but like I think King describes him as a sociopath bordering on a psychopath, which I don't think that's like the right way to use those terms, right? I don't think you escalate from one into the other, do you?
No, I don't think so. And I mean, I agree with you. I think it's literally the opposite, if anything, that this is just a psychopath.
Mm-hmm.
He was not socialized into being this way. He was born this way.
Yeah.
So yeah, he is a psychopath. Yes.
Yep. We see here that he genuinely believes that he is the only real person that exists on this planet. Everyone else is just fake. And I think one of the interesting things about this to me, and we kind of primed to have this conversation earlier, but as mentally unwell as he is, Patrick, even as a young kid, is kind of like completely failed by the system. Listen to this passage here. Mrs. Douglas had discovered it was best to keep him away from the girls because of his Roman hands and Russian fingers, but he was quiet. So quiet, there were times when he might have been taken for a big lump of clay that had been crudely fashioned to look like a boy. It was easy to ignore a Patrick who failed quietly when you had to cope with boys like Henry Bowers and Victor Criss, who were actively disruptive and insolent. And so he's assaulting women, is kind of crazy, or actually just mentally unwell, right? And yet he's quiet, and so the system misses him or can overlook him or ignore him.
And he seems to have, on first pass, a much higher capacity for danger. I think one of my first thoughts was like, oh, so he's a serial killer in the making. He enjoys, like, there's basically nothing he enjoys more than torturing these animals to death. And you can easily imagine that this would escalate to more human murders over time.
100%. That is where we would have gone with him.
I really like how King used these like cutesy euphemisms for groping women, Roman hands and Russian fingers, and as a way of sort of embodying the way in which the authority figures trivialize these actions, because it's like, it's just a little,
this is harmless. Yeah. Even though like every girl in the school like knows, don't sit near him because he's gonna touch you and make you uncomfortable. Like, it's, I mean, it's like, obviously, Patrick, not a great dude, awful. Like, we're about to learn that he murdered his 5-year-old brother. But yeah, it is. I think King takes the time to show us that, hey, the system was not equipped to deal with him and failed him, and therefore everyone around him, like, specifically.
Yeah. Well, he murdered his brother when he was 5, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So sorry, you're right. I said 5-year-old brother. I was
Yeah.
like, what?
Just catching that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, speaking of that sequence, I did not do well with
Yeah.
it.
He didn't like that. Scott did not like
No,
that.
no, did not like, and the way, like, King doesn't hold back with any of this stuff is like the remarkable thing. Like he's consistent with his idea that if I'm gonna go there, I'm gonna go all the way there.
Mhm.
And so not only do we learn that Patrick murdered his brother as an infant, um, we get to see it very explicitly, slowly,
Mhm.
like it's not good. I'm about to have a baby,
Mhm.
and this was not good for me.
Yes. Yes. It is upsetting. Um, Knowing that Patrick is about to die any moment now does give you a very fucked up sort of silver lining, but not much of one.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, I mean, again, this is it's funny. Like part of me, I keep feeling a desire to just sort of like bob and weave away from the actual discussion because the stuff that I'm thinking about is like, um, isn't it interesting that we're taking this kid who is already a murderer at the tender age of 5, and then we're saying that the supernatural evil specifically takes him out. We're
yeah,
like
hmm
wouldn't you suspect that it would just love having this kid around?
yeah,
And it's like, well, maybe that's not the way he sees it. In fact, maybe Pennywise sees it as like, you robbed me of a potential victim, for all we know.
yeah.
I don't know. I don't
Or
know.
maybe even Pennywise has a line where he's like, "Okay, that's pretty fucked up, man."
Maybe.
um, yeah, yeah. So like, awful scene. But to Patrick, that death of an infant is electrifying. The idea of taking life, it energizes him. So we see he continues to do it, never with people, but animals. Flies, and then eventually we escalate. I think I love that the book points out that on the same day that Georgie is killed by it, um, Patrick finds the old abandoned refrigerator
Mhm.
and starts to use it as like a death chamber, sealing neighborhood pets and locking them in there until they slowly die of starvation, suffocation, uh, temperature, all of the above. And like, like the death of his brother, once again, King does not hold back. He
Yeah.
shows us like, reading about a dog like slowly getting weaker and weaker every time Patrick checks, and like trying to fight back, trying to run away, and then like not even having enough energy on the third time to really just kind of bark and then lie down. That's awful. Like
Mhm.
all of this is awful. I hate all of this.
Yeah. To once again bob and weave away from actually confronting that, I think that it's really interesting that Pennywise emerges from the fridge
Mhm.
because remember when I was racking my brain over um, Pennywise emerging from the house on Neibolt Street or the ironworks, 2 places that have nothing to do with the drainage system. And now I'm like, well, those are both places where potentially something extremely dark happened. We know something extremely dark happened at the ironworks. We don't know what happened at the house on Neibolt Street, but King loves to have horrible things happen at houses,
Mhm.
um, and for them to be cursed. And here, this kid has been sort of cultivating a little cesspool of darkness in this fridge, like sort of literally sacrificing these animals to some darkness, and maybe that's what sort of opens the door for Pennywise to just step through here. Um, Maybe I'm being too literal again with the the powers and abilities of Pennywise, but at the very least, I think it's really interesting that this is one of the very few times that it emerges from a place that is not the water in some way.
Really, really bending over backwards to make this not betray your water theory here, Matt.
No, it's just extended and modified and added a few epicycles and a gravitational constant.
No, I mean, I do like the idea that like that Patrick created this dark place inside the fridge, and so Pennywise is able to access it. I think is really great. I agree with you that for sure.
Yeah, that specific thing. Yeah.
So yeah, I think what we see here basically is Patrick learns that because Henry suspects him, that he has to get rid of the evidence in the fridge, and so he goes to open the fridge. And I love that the text says "to his death,"
Mhm.
because inside he finds a bunch of small flesh colored creatures. Leeches, we'll soon discover, leeches that can fly. We actually learn here that leeches are the only thing that Patrick was ever afraid of. He went on a lake trip once and got stuck with a bunch of them on him. And the question I have for you, and I don't know if there's a definitive answer here, which is why I'm enjoying asking this question, Matt, is why do you think psychopath Patrick is afraid of leeches and only leeches?
I mean, I think just uh, uh, to a first level, like he's just not afraid of almost anything. He feels almost no emotions ever.
Mm-hmm.
And then the one time that he ever had like a physical experience that brought him fear was being covered with these creatures that are feeding on him, which is very, upsetting when, you think you're the only person in the universe, as he keeps saying over and over. It's this
Mm-hmm.
great refrain that he's the only person who's real. Um,
Uh-huh.
and then, seeing your own blood is always a little upsetting. So I think it's just it's one of the few things that's ever upset him in his life. And so the idea of a leech is being disgusting. I think the text even goes out of its way to say like, it wasn't even like a fully developed fear. It was almost more like disgust, but
Yeah.
it's the closest thing to fear that he ever felt.
Yeah.
Um, which once again makes it really interesting that Pennywise seeks him out as a victim, because it's like if we assume something like, oh, Pennywise just feeds on fear and he operates based on fear, it's like, well,
Mm-hmm.
this has got to be the worst victim in the whole city.
Yeah.
He,
This is like diet fear,
yeah,
fear light.
yeah, this is sugar-free fear, fear-free fear. Um, and yet he goes for him anyway. So
Yeah.
so it almost feels like motivated, like he really wants to take this kid out for some reason.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I like that. Um, so the leeches attack, they fly out and they land on Patrick, leaving dime-sized holes when he rips them off. Now, dimes are small, Matt,
Uh-huh.
but they're not that small.
A dime-sized hole would be pretty painful.
It's a big hole. It's a big hole in
Yeah.
your body.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would not want that. It's awful.
Yeah.
They land on Patrick's chest, on his eye, and they slowly start to suck the lifeblood out of him. And this is one of those scenes. I think when sitting here thinking about this is when I realized this. Like this week, this chapter, we've seen what Patrick did to Henry, the uncomfortableness of that situation. We've seen, the death of an infant by his hands. We've seen the abuse of animals. These horrible things that were terrible to read. And then we get to this, and this is a monster movie scene, and it's almost kind of a relief. It's just the kind of horror I can deal with. Oh, they're monsters, they're monster leeches, and they're monster leeching him to death. I'm back on stable ground. I can handle this again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. I like that. I it is a relief, right? Isn't that
Mhm.
funny? Like
Yeah.
the supernatural child murder is a relief from
Yeah.
everything
Yeah.
we've been dragged through.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I mean, the thing is, I agree. I was actually, I don't want to say apprehensive, because I was pretty sure that you would feel the same way as me. But part of me was like, is this am I just gonna come off as really fucked up in the head by saying that like it was a relief, and sort of, um, it felt like justice that this kid gets eaten,
Yeah.
rather than like, oh no, and then it gets Patrick. Oh no, like no,
Yeah.
we,
I,
we
I,
we were all so happy that Patrick got killed. Actually,
I mean, I will say it is still disturbing to me to read about a leech jumping on someone's eye, sticking its proboscis into the eye and sucking out his eye goop. Like, that's gross, but it's like gross on a level that I can handle. Um, unlike, you know, slowly pushing your baby brother's head into the pillow
Yeah.
until he struggles and then slowly stops struggling and then stops doing anything at all, and then going downstairs and casually eating some cookies and
Yeah.
chatting with your mom. Like, that is on a level so far beyond ew, gross eye booger
Right.
leech. Like, it's just two different things
Yeah.
entirely.
Yeah. Oh, just honorable mention to Patrick every day bringing home his drawings, which are just brown and black scribbles,
Yeah.
and being like, "It's a doggy,"
Yeah.
and his mom being like, "That's lovely, dear."
Yeah. Once again, a perfect example of like the people, adults around him kind of failing him, like seeing, oh, I think there might be something wrong with him, but never asking questions. His father kind of very quickly piecing together what he thinks happened, that, oh,
Yeah.
I think my son did this, but never asking the question, never exploring it, just moving on from it in the classic Derry way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just before Patrick passes out, a figure steps out of the shadows, its face running like wax, and it begins to drag Patrick away, saying one phrase, hello and goodbye. Pennywise, obviously, right? But why this form, running like wax, stable and solid in one instance, and then shifting and moving in the next? What's going on here?
I mean, I figured just like he's not afraid of anything, and so Pennywise can't really take a form that he's afraid of. So it's just kind of whatever, and Pennywise already got him, so it doesn't really need to scare him anymore. It also just seems so lazy and perfunctory that it just adds to this idea that this is like a this is not something Pennywise is even enjoying. This, and the fact, like, even saying hello and goodbye, like, where's the repartee? Where's the jokes? Where's the jumping around, the balloons, and
Yeah.
the theater? It's like, fuck, this kid.
Just hello. I'm curious how Weber did that line in the audiobook. How did he say it?
It was more emotive than. I mean, honestly, I think if I were reading this in my head, I might have almost read it in a resigned fashion, just due to how
Yeah.
like low energy this kill is.
Mm-hmm.
But he reads it more emotively than the way you just read it, for example. Which,
Sure.
you know, because Weber's Pennywise is usually very big.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, but
But yeah, that's Patrick being dragged away. And
yep.
from here, we cut over to Bev, who witnesses all this from a distance. I really liked this description of Bev. I wanted to read this to you real quick. She was standing fully upright, her head cocked to the left, her eyes wide, her hair done in braids that had been tied off with two small red velvet bows, which she had bought in Dally's for a dime. Her posture was one of total attention and concentration. It was feline, lynx-like. There's also a beat here. I think that I cut off the quote too early, but it says that her incredibly short shorts that we had been told about before, like, barely covered her underwear line, have ridden up a bit, and her underwear is showing a little bit here. Once again, like, she's not quite fitting in the pants of a child anymore, and that's like her burgeoning sexuality is showing around the edges. It's like we're very specific and pointed with this imagery. Like, King is doing a lot of this very, very, very intentionally.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we do learn something else here, that when Bev hears the hello and goodbye that you and I were just talking about, that she hears it in her father's voice. So she doesn't even see Pennywise, but he still takes the form of her fear, right?
Yeah. It kind of clarifies once again something we already suspected, that he takes the form of you, you know, the person viewing. I mean, interestingly, even though I think Pennywise doesn't even suspect that she is watching or listening, so it didn't take on her father's form intentionally. This is just something that kind of happened.
Yeah.
At least that's the assumption.
Yeah. No. Definitely. Bev returns to the fridge, looking around, sees a lot of blood, but no Patrick. Suddenly, she feels a pain and sees that one of the leeches has jumped on and bitten her. She rips it off, and as she sees another is about to strike, she suddenly recites the Gunslinger's Creed and fires her slingshot. But she misses. Or Or does she?
Or
She
does she?
swears that she would have missed, but we see the ball bearing curve in the air and hit the leech. She's basically Angelina Jolie in that Wanted movie that you love so much.
I do.
In Curve Bullets. It strikes the leech, killing it. And that was like we talked so many times in this week's reading about like, it was this divine intervention or not. This is one of those moments where we're like, yeah,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, it is. But why?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm not sure where we're going with this at this point. Like, does, you know, we're killing the leech. But didn't she kill a leech with her hand? And also, like, okay, so there's something that she said earlier about killing part of it or something.
Yeah.
I forget the exact wording. She said she killed part of it. And what's funny is I was expecting something much more dramatic than shooting a little tiny leech creature and having that be the thing that she killed that was part of it.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, well, this is being sort of portrayed as something important. There's some important information here. And for a second, so I might be kind of outflanking myself here. But my first thought was, oh, so maybe killing part of it makes it weaker. So maybe one strategy toward beating it is to kill parts of it piece by piece until it's weak enough to defeat. But then I had the second thought, which is like, well, what if the converse situation is actually the danger, which is if you leave any part of it alive, then it'll come back eventually. And like, maybe this is why they failed to kill it as children, is they only killed, most of it. And there was still some little leech crawling around somewhere. And that was enough for it to come back 28 years later. Probably going to galaxy brain there, but the text does seem to be making a big deal out of the idea that she only killed part of it, So
yeah, I mean, at the very least, we see here that like it operates at a level we've never seen before. Where we've always seen it. It is a thing. You fight the thing or you run from the thing, and then that's the end of the encounter. Now it is the thing, but it is also these other things. The leeches are part of it. We've been told that they are part of it, but they are separate from the rest of it because the other part of it comes out and drags Patrick away. So yeah, I mean, it certainly begs those questions, I think.
Yeah. And, are all of its hallucinations part of it, or does it only sort of manifest enough of its magical juju into certain manifestations such that when you damage those manifestations, those count as damaging it, right? All of these things are unknown.
Yeah. So Bev follows Patrick's dragging trail and sees it end at one of those sewer Morlock holes where a chuckle suddenly appears from beneath it. A chuckle, Matt. A chuckle of water.
A chuckle. Shit. God damn it. So there is water. Okay. Well, wait, there's water. There's water where
he's just down the sewer. He's just laughing in the sewer. Don't overthink it. He's just laughing in the sewer. Okay. He's laughing at her.
I get it.
And she runs away. And this is possibly the most interesting choice in the chapter to me, because as Bev runs away, she says to herself, "Sometimes I worry too, Daddy," she thought wildly. "Sometimes I worry a lot." And that is an interesting choice because we've kind of been primed for that statement to carry this subtextual meaning about Bev and her, growing, womaninity and her father's uncomfortable relationship with that, right? Like there's some unwritten stuff when he says that makes you feel uncomfortable. And then she echoes that here in this moment. After this whole experience, she echoes that statement, that sentiment.
Yeah, well, I think what we're saying here is that she is, actually worried about her own burgeoning sexuality. Not in the way that her father is, but in the way, in the obverse way where it's like, none of this is going to be good for me. I can already tell.
Yeah.
And she's right.
Yeah. I mean, one thing we haven't said is obviously the leeches were Patrick's fear, but they did, penetrate her.
Yeah,
And
true.
it's that I think that's there for sure.
That's true. That's true. I didn't notice that. I don't like it. I don't like that it's there, but it is.
Mm-hmm. 4 hours later, Bev comes back with the rest of the losers. Well, all of them except for Eddie, of course. They survey the scene and attempt to open the fridge. And inside the fridge, there's a message, Matt, and I've copied it here. The handwriting of Pennywise in our book. He's clearly left-handed because
you're right.
This is terrible handwriting.
Are you sure you didn't write this, Scott? Or perhaps I did.
We can both say this because we are both left-handed.
Yes.
Left-handed people are allowed to make fun of left-handed people's handwriting. That's the way it works.
It's your fault for making us live in this world you created.
Yeah. So Pennywise message to the losers is, "Stop now before I kill you all. A word to the wise from your friend Pennywise."
Yeah, that sounds like a thing that a guy would say if he was totally not scared of the kids at all.
So as the rain that was promised in Eddie's chapter comes falling down, Bill does his best Jennifer Love Hewitt in I Know What You Did Last Summer and stands in the rain screaming to the monster hunting them. "You killed my brother George, you son of a bitch, you bastard, you whoremaster. Let's see you now. Let's see you now." Important to point out here that he is not stuttering at all.
Yep. And yet another one of these moments of sort of supernatural clarity coming through the kids.
Yeah. You got that reference though, right? You've seen I Know What You Did Last Summer, right?
No, Scott.
Really?
No, I haven't.
Do you know this? It's like a meme though. Like when she stands in the rain and goes, "What are you waiting for, huh? What are you waiting for?"
Yeah, I think I've probably seen a GIF or something.
Yeah. Guess we gotta add it to the list, Matt.
I guess so. I'm so tired of letting everyone down like this.
Bill, though, Matt begins to cry. And thank the Lord, he turns to his friends for help, asking them to promise not to chicken out, asking them to help him. I think this was perfect after our conversation about Bill last week, right? About this guy that looked at these people and was resentful of them because he was never able to show his suffering and weakness. And we're like, no, here you go, Bill. Here you go.
Absolutely.
This is good.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is him admitting to himself that he can't just stoically bear the burden of leadership perpetually, and they physically, support him, and it's just so beautiful.
It is indeed, and that is where we leave our chapter with our losers, Sans, Eddie, hugging each other in the rain and giving each other strength. I love the last few lines of this. That was what she remembered best. The sound of the rain and their own shared silence and a vague sorrow that Eddie was not there with them. She remembered those things. She remembered feeling very young and very strong. Ugh.
Yep.
The power of friendship.
Yeah. I love the power of friendship.
Me too. And that is the end of this week's reading. A couple great chapters. We spent a long time on these, Matt, but worth it. We're definitely worth it, I think.
I agree.
So next week, we are going to wrap up July of 1958, Matt. We're going to cover chapter 18, as well as Derry, the fourth interlude. And from there, we'll move into the end of the book. It's coming fast now, actually.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm enjoying the ride.
Yeah, me too, man. Me too. This has been really, really wonderful. Hope you folks at home are enjoying it as well. Before we wrap everything up for this week, though, we do have to do our discussion question section. Pretty impressed with everyone this week, Matt. No disappointment from me this week. Y'all had a great amount of fun with last week's question.
Yeah, we didn't actually anticipate a very good turnout for this one because it just seemed like complicated, and but no, everyone had fun with it. So
yeah.
So
what was the question?
That question was, what is your favorite character's drink of choice, and what does that drink say about them? Masterpiece Perfect 27 says, which drink would I love to try? That's easy. Butterbeer from Harry Potter, frothy, rich, and looks delicious. A close honorable mention would be Romulan Ale from Star Trek.
masterpiece. What does that drink say about the characters that drink it?
I think we did talk at length about wanting to try like the food from the Robin Hood, no, not Robin Hood, Peter Pan movie.
Mm-hmm.
I said Robin because of Ron Williams. Maybe that's what they. Anyway, I had Romulan ale this weekend.
I'm sorry, what?
So I have a friend who holds these costume parties every once in a while, and it was like a space party, and he had a Elcar's tablet, and you ordered your drink on it, and he had Romulan ale.
But
it was Romulan ale, Scott.
So is beer?
Actually, it was mostly vodka.
Okay.
Mostly vodka.
Now Romulans, they're not real. You know that, right?
Part of me knows that.
Next up, we have Darth Fuel, who says, "Long-time listener, first-time discussion question answer. Welcome to the party, Darth Fuel. So happy to see you here." I was waiting for this post to go live because when I heard the discussion question, I immediately thought of one person, the one and only, his dude, El Duderino, the dude Jeffrey Lebowski, and his drink of choice, the White Russian. It's 3 simple ingredients: milk, Kahlua, and vodka. You don't need any special equipment to make it. There's no fancy garnish. Sure, you can elevate it, but that's not the dude's way, man. It's an incredibly lazy and easy drink to make, and it's highlighted in the scene where he makes one with milk powder and he just stirs it with his finger. The dude doesn't care that there's no milk. He just goes with the flow and enjoys his drink anyway. And it probably tasted great too. He also doesn't have to remember specific quantities because it requires equal parts of everything. It's the drink that was made for him. And if you disagree, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
I have to be honest, I've never had a White Russian. But I after all of these mentions of the White Russian, I'm going to have to try one.
I mean, it's basically just a Romulan ale from what you've explained to me. So
there's no milk in Romulan ale, Scott.
I have had White Russians before. I'm not a huge fan of them. Just like milk alcohol drinks, just not my favorite.
Yeah.
But this is a great answer, though. I think Darth Fuel is spot on for specifically what the White Russian says about the dude.
I agree. I think the Kahlua is probably key here.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
All right. Revolutionary Lie 544 says, just to be the odd man out, I have to say blue milk from the Star Wars and New Hope. My second choice is The Nectar of the Gods in the Percy Jackson books by Rick Riordan. The blue milk. Blue milk's. There was also blue milk at the party I was at, of course. It was actually, though, the blue milk from Star Wars, milked from the giant manatee creatures, specifically. I didn't drink any of it though, because that's gross.
In The Last Jedi, wasn't that green milk in that one?
I think that was blue milk, and I think the implication is that the milk that Luke drinks in A New Hope is from the giant manatee creatures that he then milks in the last movie that he's in.
Remember when people got so mad about that?
I do.
I don't understand. It's fucking great.
It's the most Star Wars thing ever, really, if you think about it.
I love it so much.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. TN Bugdoc says, there could be no more iconic of a drink than the vodka martini, shaken, not stirred, as preferred by James Bond in his not-so-secret service to Her Majesty. It only really matters when ordered by Sean Connery, though. All the others are mere pretenders. It shows a man is of simple but refined taste with the enhanced sensory abilities to detect the method of mixing. That's actually a great point. That shaken, not stirred is a fun line, but it also shows like he cares about those kind of things.
Yeah. I mean, I also always read into it that like it's the more violent way of preparing it as opposed to the sort of limp, lackadaisical way of preparing it that is the default, and he demands that level of rigor and vigor rather in his drinks.
How do you feel about the vodka martini? How do you feel about martinis in general?
I like them when I'm in the mood for like extreme intoxication. That's and I've liked so one thing is I like them with like a lot of olives because I like the olives and I like the salty olive juice.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, you do wonder if you're not sort of verging out of the domain of a proper vodka martini into just like some olive water with a little bit of vodka in it. But yeah, that's what I like about them is I like the sort of saltiness and the
Yeah.
astringency.
I think that's my problem is actually that I don't like olives very much. I've
Mm.
tried so many years to make myself like both black and green olives, and I've just never been able to fully make myself like the taste. So that's kind of the limiting factor. I think I enjoy the vodka martini better than um a gin
Gin
martini, a
martini,
typical
yeah.
martini.
I don't really like gin personally, so
Hmm.
yeah.
And I think like the cool thing about a vodka martini when I don't put any olives in it at all is that I really just like vodka, and the
Uh-huh.
vermouth just makes the vodka, which was already an incredibly smooth liquor, like just perfectly smooth.
Yeah.
It's very easy to drink that, and yes, also get incredibly intoxicated. But no, I don't have martinis very often.
Yeah, I think I had like one dirty martini, which is what they call it when there's a bunch of olives, and it was like the best thing I ever had, and then I never was able to replicate it. So that's why it's hard to answer the question because it's like, well, I had one that I really liked, and then I never had another one that I liked. So does that mean I like the drink, or does that mean I like olive juice? Anyway,
Yeah,
um,
good point. Yeah.
Pear Jane says, since you asked what Bastion drinks, a detail always struck me from the Neverending Story. The movie opens with breakfast at Bastion's house. I went and rewatched the scene to confirm what I thought I remembered. And yep, his dad, played by the inimitable Gerald McRaney, makes himself an OJ and raw egg smoothie for breakfast. He blends his
Oh.
drink while telling Bastion, we have to get on with things, don't we? And then drinks it while lecturing his 10-year-old about responsibility and how his mother's death shouldn't prevent him from getting the old job done. There's also a jar of Sanka behind the blender. For those of us younger than 40, Sanka was an omnipresent beverage in the 1980s, and instant decaf coffee and its orange label can occasionally be sighted in the far back of your grandparents' corner kitchen cabinet. What do these details tell us? This is a man who grimly drinks OJ and a raw egg every morning for the sake of protein and nutrition. He also sips instant decaf, which allows him to drink coffee while simultaneously sucking all the joy out of the coffee experience. He's most definitely not interested in a kid who draws unicorns in his math books, and even less interested in feeling his feelings about losing his wife. Bastion, by the way, does not have anything to drink at breakfast. That's a
So
very
he
fun
has
answer.
so he has nothing.
He has the
The
nothing,
nothing.
you could say.
Dun dun dun. No, I mean this man is a monster. Obviously,
Yeah, this is worse than prune
it's,
juice and gin.
it's worse than Patrick Hockstetter.
Yeah,
That's
it's
for sure.
worse. It's worse than a fridge full of dead animals. Yeah.
I do agree that decaf coffee is an absurd idea. I love coffee. Like I love the taste of coffee, so like I guess I kind of get it. But also, the thing I love most about the coffee is the calf.
Yes. I drink it every once in a while when I desperately need the taste of coffee and
Yeah.
I desperately don't want to stay up all night. But of course I agree in principle.
As far as I'm concerned, it only exists for my pregnant wife. And as soon as she's not pregnant anymore, there's no need for decaf coffee to exist.
Well, that's fair enough. Fair enough.
Next, we have Toscat7594, who says, the drink of a warrior, the beverage of choice of Worf, son of Moog, house of Martok, son of Sergei, house of Rohez. I don't know how to pronounce all these, Matt.
I don't either. Rozhenko.
Rozhenko, Bane to the Duras family, slayer of Gaurans, is prune juice. Worf is such an interesting character, a Klingon warrior who was raised by a human family on Earth, and I feel that prune juice actually represents that well. As an adopted Earthling, he discovered the drink and found it very much to his liking, but being a Klingon, he didn't truly understand the way that prune juice is treated as a joke amongst humans. This showing the influence of humans on him, but also his ignorance and displacement amongst them. That's a great answer. I had honestly completely forgotten about Worf's prune juice thing
Yeah.
until I started seeing these answers come in, and I was like, "Oh man, fuck!"
Yeah. It's the best thing is Michael Dorn's delivery every time. I will have a glass of prune juice, and it's just like with full conviction and no hint that this is a ridiculous thing. Just to go like Ataraxiary in the next answer says it's got to be Star Trek's Worf and his signature prune juice. Apparently, no gin or other alcohol required to make it a warrior's drink. There's just something silly and charming about a gruff character like Worf unashamedly enjoying a drink we mostly associate with grandparents. Then again, I've never been in battle. Maybe Grandpa knows a thing or two about the value of regular bowel movements. Delightful.
Great. Fellow says Coors beer is the only beer. I'd piss Coors if I could. You believe that, Happy Crappy? So what does Coors say about the kid?
Just immeasurable depravity.
That he is a child who actually doesn't understand what good alcohol tastes like.
Yeah, that too.
Coors is shit beer. Like, I mean, so is like Miller Lite and Bud Light. Like, it's not good, right? It's just cheap and it works. It's not, like, good.
But I mean, yeah, I see it as like the beers that you get in college, where it's technically beer and that's all that's required of it.
Yeah.
Also, I just have to say that being reminded of you believe that, Happy Crappy, like still makes me uncomfortable to think about because that character is so off-putting in every way.
Yeah, those King slogans for his terrible characters. Yep. They work.
They do. This is not an answer. I just pulled. I rarely do this. I just added this one into our allotment of 10 because I thought it was funny that the Walking Hard case says petition to get prune juice. It's a fine drink merch for the podcast. So yeah, sure, why not?
Yeah, we'll do it. Still working on the original mug idea.
Yep.
It's been 3 years. Still doing it. No, I mean, honestly, it's going to happen because we've got a couple wonderful women that are helping us with our Bangor trip, and they're going to help us with merch stuff too.
It is
specifically for that, and as part of that, our first Kingslingers mug is happening. Now this one, we'll see.
Yeah,
I think it's going to take 3 or 4 years.
that's right. Oh God.
Last but not least, we have Cash Akus, who says Clive Cussler was a favorite author of mine for a while, mainly because of his character Dirk Pitt. The idea of being an oceanographer finding long-lost treasures from dead civilizations was always very cool to me, but add to that the Indiana Jones type adventuring of fighting mercenaries and nefarious industrialists was the icing on the cake. And Dirk Pitt's favorite drink? Tequila. Not the bottom shelf as El Presidente tequila, but the high-class, smooth tequila that was like honey with a slight kick. Matthew McConaughey did a great job portraying Dirk Pitt in Sahara around 20 years ago. Definitely a fun movie I'd recommend you check out. A little freaked out that Sahara came out 20 years ago, but just a quick Google search says, yeah, it was 2005. Didn't know that movie was based on a book.
Really? Oh, I had a friend who read like all of the Clive Cussler books.
I've never read Clive Cussler once in my life.
Me neither. But apparently they're very fun. They're very like self-aware, sort of just like, here's this cool man. He's gonna do fun, awesome Indiana Jones type shit, and you're gonna have a great time. And that's the promise, and he just delivers over and over.
Is this? I feel like Elliot's tried to get us to do one of these for book club at some point. Or am I thinking of someone else?
No, I do think I've seen Clive Cussler on our book club list before.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know who it was.
I didn't know. I've seen Sahara. I did not know his name was Dirk Pitt. And that's like the most amazing name ever.
Yeah. It's I want to watch the movie and maybe you read one of the books. I'm open to it. I am.
Yeah, we should definitely do one for book club eventually, for sure.
Yeah.
Dirk Pitt.
Yep.
Awesome. All right, that is it for last week's question. Thank you again, everyone. And we'll get to work on that merch right away tomorrow.
Yeah.
But we have another question for you, and we can't wait to hear your answers to this one. Matt, what is next week's discussion question?
So, don't you just love it when kids stand up to their jerk parents? What's your favorite instance of this happening in movies, books, TV, etc., etc.?
Yeah, in honor of our good friend Eddie and his just shellacking of his mother. There's so many examples of this. Please have fun with it.
Yes, there are.
But that is it for us this week on Kingslingers. Next week, as we said, chapters 18 and Derry, the fourth interlude, as we move our way towards that big climax.
All right. Yeah, remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or over on X at kingslingerspod, or at the subreddit at reddit.com/r/doofmedia.
You're just doing it now.
I mean, that's what it's called now. I don't know what to tell you, Scott.
When I share links from it now to people, it's the URL comes in as X.
Yeah.
And I've had at least 3 different people go, I didn't click on this originally because I thought you were sending me porn or you were hacked.
It's not the best idea. I agree.
Anyway, if you're not already subscribed to Kingslingers, we strongly recommend you do so and never miss a single solitary episode. You can find us anywhere podcasts are to be found. Matt, I forgot to put this in the announcements at the beginning of the show, but maybe we'll do that next week, and I'll just leave it here as a reward, or I don't know if it's a reward, but a note for people that listen to the very end. We are probably going to be taking some weeks off here pretty soon. I have a baby coming in
what?
15 days. And I'm going to take a little bit of time off when she arrives. So we'll keep you guys informed as to what that's going to do to the schedule and when it's going to be and all that stuff. But just wanted to throw that out there here at the very end of the show for people listening, just to get yourself mentally prepared that we might have to pause our It reading just right in the middle of that climax.
Yep. Well, that's the way the cookie crumbles. So,
yeah.
We'll, like you said, we'll mention that again next week.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, it will not. Next week episode will be here for sure, but starts getting a little unknown after that.
Yep. Well, that aside, if you like Kingslingers and you want to support us, then please consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia. Special thanks this week to new patrons Dylan T and Christopher P. Welcome. We hope you enjoy our discussions over there on the Patreon.
Yeah, I think we have a new Other Levels of the Tower coming up next week, right?
Yeah, we do.
It will be on the Green Mile. So now's the perfect time to hop on board the Patreon train and see us discuss the adaptation of Stephen King's The Green Mile.
Yep.
But if you cannot afford to do that right now, of course, that is absolutely fine. If you still want to help us out, there are tons of ways to do that. Continue sharing the show. Continue talking positively about us everywhere you go. And please leave us random ratings and reviews. This week's Spotlight review comes from Your Stepdad Ron, who gives us 5 stars and says, insightful discussion and high quality content out of the many podcasts, videos, books, whatever that really explore King's work. This is the best. Wow. Thanks, Ron.
Yeah.
My stepdad rules.
That's awesome. Thanks, Ron.
All right, folks. That is going to do it for us this week. As we said, we'll be back next week for a couple more chapters and more fun. Hopefully a few less incredibly disturbing sequences, but maybe not.
Yeah, maybe more. Who knows?
Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.